This is one of those stories I've been sitting on for a really long time. It happened back when I was maybe 25 or 26, way before I met my wife and way before we had kids. I was a completely different person back then. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that I had the kind of free time and risk tolerance that I genuinely can't relate to anymore. I used to do these solo backpacking trips a few times a year, usually somewhere in the Appalachians. I'd drive out to some remote trailhead, hike deep into the backcountry, way off the trail, and spend a few days completely off the grid. No cell service, no other people, nothing. I loved it. My friends thought I was insane, and honestly, I kind of was. This particular trip was in the Cherokee National Forest, and it changed how I see backpacking forever. I had been out there for 2 days, and everything had been going perfectly. The weather had been great, the trail was quiet, and I hadn't seen another person since the first morning. That changed pretty quickly, though. On the afternoon of the second day, I noticed dark storm clouds building up to the west. I wasn't too worried at first. I'd hiked through rain plenty of times, and it was never a big deal. But within about an hour, I realized it wasn't going to be a passing shower. The wind picked up hard, and the temperature dropped fast enough that I actually stopped to put on another layer. By the time the rain started, I was already looking for a spot to hunker down. The problem was that I was in a pretty exposed section of the trail. As I predicted, it wasn't a light rain. It went from windy to full-on downpour in minutes. The wind was bending smaller trees sideways, and I could hear branches cracking and falling in the canopy above me. I started getting genuinely concerned about my safety. Lightning was striking pretty close by, and I was hiking at elevation with a metal-framed pack on my back. Not ideal. I kept pushing forward, completely soaked at that point. I was scanning the woods on either side of the trail for anything that could pass as shelter. As if by some miracle, I actually saw a structure through the trees off to my left. It was small and dark and partially hidden by the forest, but it was unmistakably man-made. As I got closer, I realized it was a tiny, one-story cabin. They looked extremely old, like it could have been a hunting cabin or a homesteader's shelter from decades ago. There was a single window on the side I was approaching. I can't overstate how relieved I was. I practically sprinted over to the thing and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dim but dry. There wasn't much in there, just a chair, a small table, and what looked like a cot frame pushed against the far wall. There was a stone fireplace on the right side that was clogged with old ash and debris. The place honestly smelled really bad, but I didn't care about anything other than stripping out of my soaked clothes and laying down. There wasn't a couch or anything in there, so I literally just picked a spot on the floor and lied down. I was in survival mode at that point, not exploration mode. All I cared about was that I was out of the storm. It wasn't until I'd been inside for maybe 10 or 15 minutes that I started actually looking around. With the storm raging outside, there wasn't much else to do besides flick on a flashlight and snoop, so that's exactly what I did. There was more stuff in that cabin than I had initially realized. For starters, there was a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner near the cot frame. It didn't look ancient like the rest of the place, which confused me. There were also a couple of cans and water jugs on the table, which made me think someone had been using the place as a base camp of sorts. Maybe another backpacker or a hunter. It wasn't unusual to find stuff like that in remote cabins, but the more I looked around, the more things started bothering me. There were marks on the wall near the door. At first I thought they were just damage from age or weather, but when I got closer to inspect them, I could see they were scratches. There were dozens of them, some shallow and some deeper. There was no pattern or order to the marks, at least not one I could see. I stepped back and looked at the door itself. The handle was a simple latch, which wasn't unusual. Despite the storm, I opened the door just to get a look at the mechanism. There was a metal bracket on the outside of the frame, which looked like it was designed to hold a padlock. The bracket was on the outside. There was no corresponding latch on the inside. That meant the door could only be locked from the outside. Things only got stranger. I shut the door and started looking around the cabin. The only thing I hadn't checked out yet was the window, so I walked over to it. The glass was still perfectly intact, which surprised me given the apparent age of the place. But then I noticed why. There were screws drilled into the window frame, one in each corner securing it shut. Those had also been driven in from outside, and around the edges of the frame on the inside, there were more scratches. deep ones. These were unmistakable. They honestly looked like someone had tried to pry the window open with their bare hands. All of it hit me at once. Someone had been kept in this cabin, trapped, as in kept against their will. I should have left right then, and I did consider that, but there was a good part of me that felt like whatever had gone on in that cabin was well in the past. Everything in the cabin looked really old. Even the sleeping bag, which did look on the newer side, admittedly, was rigid and dusty. Plus, the last thing I wanted to do was go back out in that storm again, so I stayed. I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe an hour, maybe more. The storm wasn't letting up at all. If anything, it had gotten worse. The rain on the roof was so loud that it was hard to hear much of anything else. That's probably why it took me so long to notice the other sound. I picked up on the scratching or scraping noises from outside, somewhere along the left wall of the cabin. At first, I thought it was a branch, but I couldn't remember if there had been branches low enough to even touch the exterior of the cabin. As I was thinking about it, I heard 2 heavy thumps on the porch. They honestly didn't sound like storm sounds. This time I stood up. I did that thing where you freeze in place and try to focus by staring at a random spot on the wall. I was trying to listen, but if someone was moving out there, it would have been impossible to hear over the storm. I started getting paranoid that those sounds I heard were just a few of many, and that the rest had been drowned out by the rain. My eyes drifted over to the window. I couldn't bring myself to look through it. If someone really was out there, they'd probably be looking through it. I stayed in that position for what felt like forever. After a while, I started to relax a bit, thinking I had just been hearing the storm, or at the very worst, an animal poking around the cabin. I was almost ready to forget about everything when I heard something that sent me over the edge. Pressure on the door, like someone was leaning their full weight against it from the other side. The wood creaked and the latch rattled once before the pressure released. My heart rate instantly shot back up, and that's when something clicked. Why would someone be outside in a storm like this, circling the cabin, tapping on the walls, without just coming in? The door wasn't locked, nothing was stopping them, and then I thought about what I'd found inside the cabin, and it occurred to me that maybe whoever was out there didn't want to come inside. Maybe they wanted me to stay inside. Maybe the whole point was to keep me in there. I don't know if that was the right conclusion or if my mind was just spiraling, but I decided I was leaving right then. I didn't care about the storm. I started moving things into my backpack as fast as I could. I had this sickening feeling that something really bad was about to happen, and I was right. The next few moments were a blur. I was maybe 30 seconds from walking out the door when I heard the sound of glass shattering behind me. I spun around just in time to see something come through the window, and that was all I could see before the whole room erupted in flames. The flames spread so fast that I couldn't even process what was happening. One second I was standing in a dark room, and the next second the walls were on fire. The heat hit me like a physical wall, and the door wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the outside. I slammed into it with all my might, and it gave. It collapsed off its hinges, and me with it. I scrambled to get back on my feet, and I just ran. I couldn't even see. I was just running wildly through the woods and rain, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cabin. But before I could get a safe distance away, I felt something tackle me from behind, and I was back on the ground. There was a person on top of me, and suddenly I was fighting for my life. I clawed and kicked and screamed, but this guy wouldn't get off me. He was yelling too, and he kept trying to get me in a chokehold. He was gouging at my eyes and pulling my hair, and I started to feel dizzy, but I managed to push him off. I got back up and kept running, and whoever had just tried to kill me was screaming like a maniac. I looked back twice. I couldn't see my attacker, but I did see the cabin, which was fully engulfed in flames. I think the picture of that fireball is burned into my brain forever. The second time I looked back, the glow was smaller but still visible through the woods, but I just kept running. For all I knew, I was being chased. I didn't stop until my legs gave out. I found a spot where a couple of large trees had fallen against each other, and there was a narrow gap underneath that blocked most of the rain. I crawled under there and just collapsed. I couldn't feel my body. I don't know if it was the fire, the rain, or the attack. Maybe all three, but I was completely numb. All I did was sit in that crouched position and try to keep breathing. I don't know how many hours passed under those trees, but time lost all meaning. Eventually, I felt some feelings start to re-enter my body, and I told myself it was move or die. Whoever was out there was probably looking for me, and he couldn't have been that far away. So I got up and started moving through the woods. I didn't know where the trail was, but I didn't really care. I honestly can't tell you how I survived that night, but I did. I stumbled onto a random trail and just followed it. I was soaked and probably bleeding from multiple places, but I just kept trudging on. Eventually, the rain subsided a bit, at least enough for me to figure out where I was. I made it to some random trailhead, and by that point, the storm had passed. I don't remember too much after that. All I remember is that the first person I saw drove me to a hospital. I had second-degree burns on my left forearm and the back of my neck, and doctors told me I was lucky I hadn't inhaled more smoke than I did. None of it was permanent, but it hurt like hell for a long time afterwards. By the time I was healed and safe at home, I told myself I would never camp or hike alone again. Someone had intentionally set that cabin on fire to kill me. That's the only thing that makes any sense. It was pouring rain, a full-blown thunderstorm, and the roof was metal. There's no way a wooden structure goes up like that fast unless the wood had been treated with something beforehand. I gave the police everything, or as much as I could, but I could tell they weren't really going to do anything. And to be fair, I wasn't in a charted part of the woods, so it would have been silly to hound them. The only thing I don't understand is the timing of everything. My wife would probably tell you I stopped doing solo trips because I grew up and got more responsible, and she's not entirely wrong, but I honestly never told her about this incident. And I know I'll never go backcountry trekking again alone. My name is James. This happened maybe 7 or 8 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s and still doing stuff that I probably shouldn't have been doing. I had this friend Charles who was kind of notorious in our friend group for finding cool places to explore, like abandoned buildings and old factories. If it was somewhere you weren't supposed to be, Charles had probably already been there and can tell you exactly how to get in. He spent a weird amount of time on Google Earth and these niche urbex forums, and he'd always be hitting the group chat with screenshots of random places he wanted to check out. Most of us would entertain his ideas, but never actually follow through. I was usually the exception. Charles and I had been friends since high school, and I think the reason we got along so well was that we had similar thresholds for risk. While most of our friends would hear his pitches and go, "That sounds insane," I'd hear them and go, "When are we going?" It was a dynamic that led to some great memories and a few situations that I look back on now and genuinely wonder how we made it out unscathed. This story is about one of those situations. One weekend, Charles texted me about a fire lookout tower he'd found deep in some forest not far away from us. I really wish I could remember the name of the forest, but I can't. Charles said it had been decommissioned years ago and was just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, completely untouched. He didn't tell me how he'd found it, but I didn't want to know. He was convinced we could hike out to it, climb it, and spend the night up there. I was more skeptical. I mean, things like that are usually fenced off or at least protected somehow, but I promised him I'd at least come and check it out. To be fair, the idea of being 70 feet or so up in the middle of a forest with a 360-degree view sounded incredible to me. We picked a random weekend and made it happen. Charles planned the entire thing out, including the drive, what to pack, and how to find the tower once we were in the woods. It was a 3-hour drive away, and Charles told me the hike would be off the trail but pretty short, about 4 miles or so. We drove out early in the morning on Friday and made it into the woods sometime in the afternoon. For some reason, I was kind of expecting us to get lost, or at the very least not find the tower, which is exactly why I was all the more astonished when we actually did. Seeing it through the trees for the first time was an insane sight. I remember blurting out "no fucking way" when I saw how tall it was. I was even more astonished when we got to the base of it and realized it was completely unprotected or fenced off. It was just sitting there in the middle of the woods waiting for us to find it. The cab at the top was this small, square room with windows on all 4 sides. There was a metal staircase that zigzagged up the frame, with a section of vertical ladder for the final stretch up to the cab. The whole thing looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Some of the lower railings were bent or missing, and there was graffiti on the support beams near the base. To be completely honest, it did not look like the type of structure anyone would be eager to climb, but Charles was practically giddy. While I was hesitating and debating whether I should try convincing him to back out, he had already started climbing. I yelled at him to be careful, and that got him to slow down. I figured what the hell, and told myself to stop bitching. The two of us made our way up carefully, checking the stairs as we went. Most of them felt solid enough, but there were a few spots where the bolts had rusted through and the steps wobbled. The vertical ladder section near the top was the sketchiest part. It was 20-something feet of straight climbing with nothing but a narrow metal cage around it. The adrenaline rush was insane, but that's what Charles lived for. He made it up without any issues. The view from the cab was unreal. You could see for miles in every direction. We had also timed it perfectly. The sun was maybe an hour from setting. Our plan was to camp out for the night and catch the sunrise. There was a decently wide wraparound walkway up there, which is where we decided to chill, at least initially. We cracked a few beers and just enjoyed the view and some conversation. The sun eventually went down, and the sky went from orange to purple to dark blue in a matter of minutes. Once the light was gone, the forest below us was just a black mass in every direction. There wasn't a single light in sight. The stars were incredible, easily the best I've ever seen. But being alone out there in the dark was freaking me out a little. It was just weird not being able to see anything, despite knowing there was a whole forest below us. Charles could tell I was getting a little antsy, and he started messing with me, grabbing my shoulder and stuff like that. But the thing that pissed me off the most was when he smacked his metal water bottle against the side of the tower. It sent this incredibly loud, echoing clang in every direction, probably to be heard for miles. The sound was so loud and ominous that I actually got mad at him. I told him I wanted to go inside the cab, and he finally got the hint. There wasn't much in there, by the way. It had clearly been hollowed out ages ago. He said he was going to finish his beer before coming in and joining me, and I was fine with that. I picked a random corner and started setting my sleeping stuff up. But before I could finish, he told me in a very quiet, serious voice to come back outside. Very un-Charles-like. So I did. I walked back around to where he was sitting and saw that he was pointing diagonally downwards, toward the forest below us. At first I thought he was just messing with me again, but it only took me a few seconds to realize what he was pointing at. There was a light down there. It was faint and pretty far away, but it was definitely down there, and it was genuinely horrifying. It was weaving through the forest at what seemed like walking pace, and my first thought was that it was a person who'd heard the clang from the tower. I don't know why I felt the urge to whisper, but I did. I told him he was stupid for doing that, and we were probably moments away from getting caught or arrested or something. He looked at me with this confused expression before saying, "You think that's a person?" Now it was my turn to be confused. What the hell was he talking about? I asked him what else it could be, and he said that light was moving way too evenly. He wasn't exactly wrong. The light wasn't swinging or wobbling the way you'd expect someone carrying a lantern or flashlight to be. But then again, it was probably too far away to tell. I didn't say anything after that. Neither did Charles. He just kept staring at this mysterious light as it continued weaving through the forest. Part of me thought it was just some random hiker that had nothing to do with us, but I knew that was wishful thinking. After a few minutes, it was obvious that the light was getting closer. It was also much clearer that the light was moving perfectly, like it was floating or hovering. Charles asked me what we should do, and I didn't have an answer for him. There wasn't really anything we could do. Like, what were we gonna do, climb down? As we were throwing out more theories, the light suddenly zipped forward, like it skipped a beat. It was really thick, but for a split second that light went from steady, even movement to an abrupt zip forward. Then it was back to steady movement again. I started feeling my palms start to sweat, and I could tell Charles was really freaked out too. I kept trying to convince myself that whoever was down there was just wandering aimlessly through the woods, but again, wishful thinking. They were definitely heading for the tower, and after about 10 minutes, they reached it. At that point, the light was directly below us, and I was bracing myself for someone to yell up to us and announce themselves as police. But no, the light just stopped moving and stayed in that exact spot right below us. From our vantage point straight above, we could see the light itself, but not whoever was holding it. Charles and I stared at it for a while. The suspense was killing me, but it must have been killing Charles even more, because he again did something I wanted to throw him off the tower for. This guy actually yelled, "Hey, are you good?" down at the light, revealing our presence. I looked at him in horror. I genuinely couldn't believe he would do something so stupid. We didn't get a response though, and the light didn't even move. We waited a little bit, and then Charles yelled down again, but still nothing. So there we were, 70 feet up in an abandoned fire tower in the middle of nowhere, with someone or something blocking our only exit. We were completely trapped. We must have watched that light for 30 minutes straight, whispering to each other every so often. It never moved once. I wasn't worried about being secretive anymore. Charles had burned that bridge a long time ago, so I did something I should have done a while ago. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it straight down at the base of the tower. But even after I did that, I still couldn't see the source of the light. Eventually, we accepted that there was nothing we could do and tried to go back to what we were doing. We went back to talking, but I made sure I never took my eyes off that light for more than a few seconds. Charles thought it was some kind of LED that someone had placed there to mess with us, but who the hell would bother doing that? At some point, Charles said he was going to climb down and check it out, and I told him that was insane. Not only was that inviting trouble, but it was downright stupid and dangerous. As we were arguing about it, I glanced down and realized that I couldn't see the light anymore. There was just darkness and more darkness down there again. I frantically scanned the emptiness below us with my eyes, looking for the light, but it wasn't there anymore. Charles seemed relieved, but I was the opposite. He kept telling me to relax, saying whoever had been there had probably left, but I was more freaked out than I had been when the light was just sitting there motionlessly. The thought that someone could be down there, and now we couldn't even see them, was terrifying to me. Charles reassured me that we'd obviously be able to hear if anyone tried to climb the ladder, which I guessed was true, but I was still really unsettled. Suddenly, I didn't want to be in the open air anymore. I suggested that we wait out the rest of the night from inside the cab, and he agreed. So we went inside and set up our sleeping bags. Neither of us were going to sleep though, that was suicide. Staying awake turned out to be the right decision, because not 20 minutes after going inside, we started hearing noises. The first ones were all metallic clangs that echoed up through the steel frame of the tower. They weren't footsteps, which I want to be crystal clear about, because I was listening specifically for footsteps, and this was not that. It sounded more like someone struck one of the support beams with a wrench or a crowbar. A few minutes later, another one came. This one was more of a grinding sound, like metal being twisted against metal, and it lasted for a good few seconds before stopping. Charles and I kept looking at each other like we were expecting the other one to do something, but there was nothing we could do. The sounds kept coming from what sounded like different spots, which was what really got me because it meant whatever was causing them was moving down there. The sounds continued on and off for a while. I kept trying to map out the sounds in my head, figure out where they were coming from, how many sources there were, whether they were getting closer or staying at the same level. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Charles and I were whispering to each other about what we'd do if we started hearing someone walking up. I was sitting against the far wall of the cab, facing the windows on the opposite side. Charles was on the opposite side, looking over my shoulder. There were so many windows in there that we didn't feel safe and wanted to be able to see out of all of them. There wasn't much to see though. They were all pretty dark, with the only light being from the stars and the moon. But then, I saw something. A dark outline moved across the glass. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing fast enough, but then it passed in front of the next pane over, and that's what did it. I couldn't help but yell, and Charles scrambled away from the window. The two of us immediately ran over to the door and pressed our backs against it. If someone tried to come through that door, they were going to have to push through both of us. I kept looking for the figure through the windows, but I couldn't see anything. That was impossible though. Unless they were crawling on all fours, I should have been able to see them. Charles and I sat up like that for a really long time, and I could hear him hyperventilating. What followed was the most tense and terrifying few hours of my life. Charles and I sat there in that exact position like our lives depended on it. By the time the sun started coming up, I was completely exhausted. When it was finally light enough to see, I counted to 3 and then swung the door open violently, expecting someone to be crouching behind it, but there was no one there. Charles and I ran around the side of it to confirm that, and it was clear. I looked down to the base of the tower, and there was nothing down there either. We grabbed our stuff and started descending as fast as we could. We made it about 3/4 of the way down the staircase before Charles stopped in front of me. He just stood on the landing, staring down at the next section of stairs. I looked past him and saw it immediately. An entire section of the staircase was gone. It wasn't just a few steps. I'm talking about an entire section of stairs, straight up missing. It was impossible, but we were staring at it. Someone had deconstructed an entire section of staircase during the night while we were sitting directly above them. That must have been what those sounds were, but that didn't make sense. The noises didn't stop until after I had seen the person up there. So had they really crossed that gap twice? In the dark? No way. Plus, there's absolutely no chance someone could have done that without us hearing it. That would have been a lot louder than a few clangs here and there. We stood on that landing for a while, trying to figure out what to do. We had to just jump across. It wasn't that far, but it was still scary. Charles ended up twisting his ankle, but I was fine. We made it the rest of the way down, and that was that. There was no one waiting for us at the bottom. There was actually nothing there at all, including the metal steps that had been removed, at least as far as we could tell. Granted, we didn't look around too much. It didn't make any sense, but we weren't sticking around. I still don't have an explanation for any of it. Not the light, not the sounds, not the figure I saw outside the window, and definitely not how someone managed to remove an entire section of steel staircase in the middle of the night without us hearing it. Every time I see Charles, this is something we still talk about. I go camping alone a few times a year. I've been doing it since I was in my 20s, and at this point I'm in my late 30s, so close to 15 years of solo trips at this point. I know the risks, which is why I carry a rifle. This happened about 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. It's a massive stretch of forest, over 700,000 acres, and if you know where to go, you can hike for days without seeing another person. I had a rough stretch of work and my head wasn't in a great place, and I felt like I just needed a few days away from everything. I drove out on a Thursday morning. I parked at a trailhead off a Forest Service road and started hiking. The plan was simple: 3 nights in the backcountry. That was pretty much it. I had my tent, my pack, enough food and water for 4 days, and my .308 bolt action that I always bring on solo trips. The first day was exactly what I needed. I covered about 7 miles before finding a flat spot near a creek bed that looked like a good place to camp. I set up my tent, gathered some wood, and had a fire going by the time the sun started going down. I cooked some food, drank a beer, and sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. The whole time, I didn't see a single person. I fell asleep around 10. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what woke me. It was more like my brain just switched on for no reason, the way it does sometimes when you're sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. I lay there for a minute and stared at the ceiling of my tent, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something. There was a faint orangey glow coming through the walls of my tent. I unzipped the tent flap and looked out. Maybe 200 yards away, through the trees, there was a fire. Not a big one, it was about the size of a campfire, but it was definitely there. It was flickering, which is how I knew it was a fire. I watched it for a few minutes, waiting to hear talking or something. I wanted to confirm it wasn't some random forest fire, but after a while of looking at it, I couldn't see or hear anything beyond the fire. I watched it a little while longer just to see if it would grow out of control, but it didn't. I figured it was another camper set up nearby that I just hadn't noticed during the day. It wasn't impossible, especially since I had gone to sleep relatively early. I figured whoever it was had gone to sleep and left their fire going, which is irresponsible but not uncommon. I watched it for about 5 more minutes, and then zipped my tent back up and went to sleep. It didn't bother me too much. When I woke up the next morning, the fire was the first thing I thought about. Not because it had scared me, but because I was curious. I wanted to see who else was out there, maybe say hi, but mostly to satisfy my curiosity. I packed up my campsite and hiked in the direction where the fire had been. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the area. I was pretty confident I had the right spot. There was a natural clearing that lined up with the angle I'd been looking from. But when I got there, I stopped. There was no fire pit, nor was there a ring of stones or a pile of ash or scorched ground, charred wood, nothing. The ground was completely undisturbed. I walked the whole clearing, checking for any sign that someone had been there, but there was no signs of life whatsoever. The area was pristine. I stood there for a while, genuinely confused. I was certain I'd seen a fire. It had been a campfire burning clearly for at least 5 minutes while I watched it, and yet the ground where it should have been looked like no one had set foot there in months. I considered the possibility that I had the wrong spot, but there wasn't another clearing anywhere near the right distance or direction. There wasn't much I could do beyond that though, so I just moved on. I still had 2 more nights planned, and I wasn't about to cut my trip short over something silly like that. I hiked for most of the day. The terrain changed as I moved deeper into the forest. The creek bed fell away behind me and the ground started climbing. By mid-afternoon, I was in a denser, older section of the forest where the trees were taller and the canopy was thick enough to block out most of the sky. It was quieter in there, which was nice. I found a good campsite around 4. That evening was uneventful. I doused my fire a little after 9 and turned in for the night. I don't know what time it was when the sound woke me up, but it was loud enough to pull me out of a dead sleep. I woke up to this distant, enormous cracking sound, like a thick branch being snapped in half, except it kept going. It was violent, and it lasted for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. At the tail end of it, there was a deep, resonant thud that I could quite literally feel in the ground beneath me. I instantly knew what it was. A tree had fallen somewhere deeper in the woods, or at the very least, a very large branch. If you've ever heard the sound of a tree falling before, which I do understand is kind of a rare occurrence, it's amazing and terrifying at the same time. It didn't scare me per se, but the deafening force and scale of it gave me this crazy adrenaline rush. I lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to figure out what had just caused it. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It wasn't storming, and there was barely any wind. There was nothing I could think of that would have brought a tree down on a night like this, but there was also nothing I could do. I couldn't fall asleep at that point either. My heart was still racing, and the adrenaline had me awake, so I just kind of closed my eyes and waited for it to wear off. But then, not 10 minutes later, it happened again. Only this time, it was much louder. That same gruesome crackling sound, followed by a crash of branches and a deafening thud, but this one was close. Not right on top of me, but close enough that the sound was almost disorienting, and it came from a completely different direction than the first one. The first tree had fallen somewhere to the south, and the second one was to my northwest. I sat up immediately. Now I was actually scared. 2 trees falling on the same night in 2 different parts of the forest with no wind and no storm. That was inconceivable. I kept trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. The most logical thought was that the first one had caused some kind of chain reaction, but that hypothesis didn't account for the fact that the trees fell in completely different parts of the forest. Whatever brought down the first tree had nothing to do with the second one. They were 2 different events. But that was even more inconceivable. I was sitting there processing all of this when I heard something new. Something that took my fear from a medium 5 to a resounding 10. It was this low and continuous rumbling sound that I can only describe as a cross between a groan and a growl, like a person clearing their throat, except it didn't stop. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. I've heard bears, I've heard elk, I've heard bobcats. This wasn't any of those. It sounded like something was making the noise on purpose, and it went on for what felt like a full minute without any break or variation. I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around as quietly as I could, and aimed it at the tent flap. At that point, I was full on panicking. I must have sat like that for 20 minutes. The sound eventually tapered off. It didn't stop abruptly, it kind of faded out, like whatever was making it had moved further away. And just like that, the forest was quiet again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't think I would have been able to if I tried. It was the worst night of my life. As soon as I saw daylight, I got out of the tent. I packed up as quickly as possible, still spooked and extremely unsettled despite being able to see. Once everything was in my pack, I started walking in the direction of the second tree, the louder and closer one. I needed to see it, if only to confirm that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I had my rifle ready in my hands, so I found the tree after about 10 minutes. The thing was massive, and its trunk was lying at an angle across a shallow slope. Broken branches and debris were scattered all around it, so it was real. I really couldn't believe it. I'd been trying to convince myself I had just imagined everything from the night before, but there it was. I needed to keep investigating. I wouldn't have been satisfied leaving without knowing what had caused the fall. I walked over the stump, which was about 3 feet high. The wood where it had broken was pale and fresh, but the break wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind of jagged, splintered fracture you get from wind stress or root failure. The wood around the break point had been torn apart in a way that I had never seen before. Parts of the stump looked like they'd been gouged. I really don't know how else to describe it. There were long, irregular grooves running through the wood at different angles, and it looked like some of them were up to an inch deep, at least. The wood genuinely looked like it had been stripped and chewed rather than cut or snapped. The more I looked, the more I noticed. Some of the bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath had that same gouged, chewed up look. I can't pretend I knew what I was looking at, because I didn't. I'd seen beaver damage before, and this was not that. Beavers leave clean cuts. I'd seen woodpecker damage, and this wasn't that either. This was aggressive, messy, and covered way too much surface area to be any animal I could think of. The tree hadn't fallen because it was dead or because the wind knocked it over. Something had worked on that trunk until it came down, and suddenly I felt this really nasty feeling in my gut. I needed to leave. I stopped examining the tree and started backing away, but as I was turning to leave, something near one of the tree branches caught my eye. There was a small cluster of items sitting on the ground. If it weren't for the fact that they looked man-made, I wouldn't have even bothered checking them out. As soon as I saw what they were, I lost my shit. It was a blue bandana and a carabiner, and they were both my items. I instantly started digging through my pack and confirmed those two items were missing. In that moment, I grabbed my stuff, shoved it in my backpack, and ran. I didn't know if running was the right decision, if that would have attracted attention to me, but I did anyway. I just needed to get out of those woods. I got tired after a while under the weight of all my stuff, but I moved as fast as I could. The hike back took me most of the day, and the entire time I felt like I was being stalked or watched. I felt like something was going to jump out from somewhere any second. I kept my rifle in my hands the entire time. I made it back to my car around 3 in the afternoon. I drove out of there so fast, despite my exhaustion. The first thing I did when I got to a safe distance away was call the police. I don't think they took me very seriously, but I didn't care. I also knew there probably wasn't much they could do, but I didn't care about that either. I was pretty messed up for days afterward. None of it made any sense whatsoever. What I couldn't get over was the fact that my stuff had been rummaged through. Something had either stalked me through the woods, or knew where I was the entire time. That unexplainable fire from the first night must have had something to do with it. There's no way that was a coincidence. And those trees, I still have no explanation for what could have cut them down. I genuinely don't think it was anything human, but as for what animal it could have been, I have no idea. I still go camping, believe it or not, but this is something that I think will hang over me forever. It was sometime in April, peak corona time in my state. Quarantining and lockdown were still in effect. There was nothing to do on Friday and Saturday nights besides Zoom calls with your friends. It was like a week after I finally hopped on the wave and agreed to jump on a Zoom call with my 4 friends, Ashley, Haley, Sylvia, and Alexa. It was a Friday night, and it was supposed to be our little Zoom drinking party. We were going to be playing drinking games and just staying up until the early hours of the morning. Ashley shared the link to join the Zoom call in our iMessage group chat. We joined one at a time, first Ashley, then me, then Haley and Sylvia. It seemed they were all on their laptops. I was the only one on my phone, so I switched to my laptop as well. It took a little while for Alexa to finally join, but when she joined, her screen was black. We all joked around, chanting Alexa's name and whatever, asking her what's up with her webcam. She started typing into the text chat of the Zoom call saying she didn't know what was wrong with her webcam and microphone, that it said both were offline. We continued to joke around about it, but also tried helping her, though we didn't really know how to be of much assistance with that. Eventually she typed in the chat, "BRB, I'm gonna go try to figure this out." So we all went on to our drinking and just chatting on our video chat, while we figured Alexa was doing whatever to try to fix her computer. But something randomly happened sometime into our call. Something completely unexpected that kind of scarred all of us. Alexa's cam suddenly started working, and her box went from black to showing an old creepy man doing something I really don't want to repeat. When he noticed the camera turned on, he jumped to close the laptop, and and the screen went dark again. The four of us screamed and started freaking out. We tried calling Alexa, but now it seemed her phone was off. We didn't have her mom or sister's number, so we all agreed to drive over to Alexa's place to see what was going on. Her mom answered the door in her robe, looking concerned. We asked her if Alexa was home. She said yes and called her down. Alexa never responded though. Her mother said she had just gotten home an hour ago, but that Alexa's door was locked half an hour earlier. We all explained what happened on the Zoom call, and she freaked out and ran upstairs to bang on Alexa's door. That got no answers. We all got a sickly feeling when we realized what could be going on. Alexa's mom called the cops that second, and when Officer Perry showed up, we told him everything. He called for backup and went upstairs to knock on the door and tried to reason with whoever could be in there. When there was no response, he began to kick the door down. When he finally broke through the door, there was no one on the bed. The laptop and phone were left on the bed, but no one was in the room. The window was wide open, enough for someone to crawl through and hop outside down to the awning roof below. We all found Alexa in the basement minutes later. She was hiding under a blanket in the corner of the room. She said when she was home alone, she saw some older man with a big knife sticking out of his pocket in the living room, so she snuck down to the basement and hid. She didn't know when it was safe to come out of hiding, as she couldn't hear her mother getting home. Police backup finally showed up, and the information of the break-in and the man was sent to the local news outlets to alert people to be on the lookout. It's crazy how that Zoom call might have saved Alexa and her mother's lives. A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to hold a Zoom reunion, as we had not seen each other for quite some time, and all of us finally had the time to chat since there was a lockdown in our country. We're all college students, and most of us had lost contact with each other, so we decided to post on our social media that we would be holding a Zoom reunion, which was open to all the alumni of our old school. We got responses from many people, and we even accepted people we didn't know as long as they knew our mutual friends. We wanted it to be a big social event and didn't really care who joined. Finally, the day of the reunion arrived. I scheduled a meeting and posted it on my Instagram story because there were too many people to individually text, which I now realize was a big mistake because I had basically given everyone access to join the Zoom call. The Zoom meeting began normally, with all of us excited to meet our old friends. We made some new friends through our mutual friends, and we were having a grand time, when someone called Sat_An_20 unmuted their mic and started making groaning sounds. We had a friend named Anne, so we thought it was just her pranking us. We texted her to stop because it was getting annoying, but to our surprise she texted back apologizing because she hadn't attended the call due to prior engagements. We were surprised and asked this Anne person to open their video and show us their face or they would be removed from the meeting. They didn't show their face, so I removed them from the meeting. The Zoom call resumed and we were all joking about the incident. Suddenly, my network strength became weak, and I had to leave the meeting. I joined back soon after, but Sat_An_20 had somehow taken the opportunity and re-entered the meeting in the few seconds that we unlocked it. This time they began to share their screen and displayed a video of a black tunnel on loop. We were terrified, and a lot of people were leaving the meeting because of it, but my friends and I were determined to find the person who was destroying our reunion. We constantly tried to remove them from the meeting, but the second my friend's network connection weakened, somehow the Sat_An_20 person became the host. There was nothing we could do now. The account was still playing the video on loop and chanting something in a strange language. We could have left the meeting, but really wanted to know who was disrupting it. Suddenly the video stopped, and Sat_An_20 started talking in a distorted voice about how my brother Rav had completed the ritual and attained salvation, and we could take their help and do the same too. Here's the thing. I had a twin brother who died before birth. My parents had wanted to name him Rav. They told me when I was very young about his prenatal death and begged me to never talk about him. Only my grandparents and parents knew about him, as the subject was too painful to disclose to others. I had always wanted a twin, and blaming myself for his death, I never told anyone about him. Soon after, we had moved to a new city. I was certain that the only people who knew about my brother in the city were my parents. I had not told even my best friends about him. I had no idea how this Sat Ann 20 person knew about him. They truly had no way of knowing that I knew about. With shaking hands, and now without a doubt convinced that this was a supernatural occurrence, I wordlessly exited the meeting. I do not know what happened afterwards. I didn't respond to my friends' texts and have since not talked to them. To this day, I know this is an experience I will not soon forget. In April of this year, my school had made a virtual classroom thing where we would do all of our assignments online on websites like Google Classroom and whatnot. They also told us about a new tool called Zoom, where students and teachers can all have a virtual meeting to talk about schoolwork and stuff. Well, one day in May, after I finished my assignments, my dad went out on a night shift at his job. So it was only my mom and my mom was asleep. I called my friends, and we all agreed to try a Zoom call out with each other to catch up on how everyone has been, and it also eventually ended with us playing some console games like Call of Duty. At one point, around 10 p.m., we were playing Modern Warfare, and all of a sudden, one of my friends, who I'll call Jack for privacy reasons, suddenly told me that he saw a very sudden blurred movement behind me in my room, but he wasn't sure because my lights were off, and the only light was from the TV in my room. I have a somewhat small room with only my bed, a drawer next to my bed, a closet in the left corner of the room, and my TV in the front. That's when I noticed that my pillow was on the floor. I went over to pick it up, and I just dismissed it thinking it accidentally fell or something. So I just went back to play with my friends. About 10 minutes passed by, and Jack once again says he swears he sees movement behind me in my room. When I turned around, I saw that the pillow had fallen again in the exact same spot. This time I became anxious because I knew 100% I put the pillow in a place that it couldn't possibly fall without someone or something moving it. I bend down slowly to pick it up, and then I hear Jack scream. I put the pillow on the bed and rushed over to my laptop sitting on my chair to ask him what was wrong. All he said was to look under my bed, and I saw it. I saw two glowing eyes which were lit up by the TV screen. Once the person realized that I saw them, they immediately jumped out and tried to grab me. I instinctively swung my arm at their head, and I hit him right in the nose. He looked to be at least 45 and had long, dry, straight hair that looked like it hadn't been cut or washed in at least a year. He had a scratchy-looking beard and was a very skinny but tall guy. He looked to be about 6'3". He fell onto my bed, and I could see his nose was bleeding, so I took my chance and ran to my mom's room and locked the door. I could hear his footsteps stomping through the house coming towards the room, so I immediately told my mom to call the police despite her groggily shouting at me to tell her what was happening. She called the cops, and by then I could hear his footsteps as he was going from room to room to find where I went. When he came to the room we were in, he tried the handle, and when he saw it was locked, he knew we were in the room. But he didn't bang on the door like I thought he would. Instead, I heard a small chuckle, and then I looked under the little crack under the door, and I could see his feet standing there. As soon as I looked under, he looked through the crack as well, and I could see his bloodshot eye. I also saw a couple drops of blood on the floor, and then on the other side of the door, I heard "You'll pay for that" in a psychotic, high-pitched, childish voice. When I backed away, he screamed like a madman and started banging on the door over and over. I started covering my ears, trying to shut the sound out, and I could see my mom crying. Just then, we hear the sirens outside, but the man doesn't stop banging and shouting. The police knock on the door, and when they hear the man, they immediately knock the door down and come in, literally like something from a movie. I heard the man stop, and I thought the police already got him. When I opened the door, I saw the man facing the two officers, looking like he was going to attack them. When he stepped towards them, one of them shot a taser at him, and he immediately fell and started shaking violently. They cuffed him and took him out to the car, and a third officer came to question me and my mom. I told him the whole story, and then the three officers started searching for the place of breaking and entering, and it turned out that he had broken in through the window in my dad's office room, and they found a small axe and drill under my bed in my room. We later found out this man wasn't documented, and no one knew who he was, and he didn't appear to have any family. He was sent to a mental institution, but that's not the worst part. The police later tried to find out where the man originally lived. and all the man told them was that he lived in the woods near my home. When the police went searching for his home for any evidence, they found a small secluded area in the woods with a small wooden shack. When they went in, they told us that they found multiple weapons, bags of old food, and worst of all, 2 pictures of me, one of me asleep, which was taken from inside the house outside my bedroom door, and one of me eating dinner from outside the window. I hope nothing like this ever happens to anyone, and I hope no one else has to add another bad memory to the long list from this terrible year. My older sister Jen is 5 years older than me, and this story also happened 5 years ago. Before Jen was dating her current boyfriend, she used Tinder to meet a few guys. I remember the night specifically. She told me and our other sister Maria that she was meeting a guy at a bar a few blocks down. When she got there, she sat at the bar and texted the guy to let him know where she was sitting. Under a minute passes and a man sits next to her, offering to buy her a drink. This man is significantly older than my sister, and according to her, gave off a horrible smell, had bad breath, and had a crooked front tooth. She told him no thank you right away, as she had a guy coming to meet her. The man didn't get up just yet. He kept sitting there, said he'd buy her a drink in the meantime before her date got there. Jan felt very uncomfortable and asked the man to please leave her alone. The man got up from the bar stool. Jan told us she did a side glance to see where the man had gone, and she said he sat at one of the nearby table booths. Jan texted her date about what just happened and asked him to please hurry. There wasn't a response, so she sits there a few minutes, texts again, "Where are you?" This time the guy responds, "Running late, get a drink or two without me." Now this was an odd text for a guy to send to a girl he's meeting, and to make it even worse, the man from before came back to sit next to Jan, asking where her date was and acting all upset that she was still alone. My sister responded to the man once or twice, then had enough and asked him to please leave her alone once again. She texted her date one more time, saying, "Sorry, I'm gonna leave." And as she sent it, the man's phone, which he left on the bar, vibrated. My sister immediately put 2 and 2 together and said she's going to the bathroom. I remember she called our sister Maria asking what to do. Maria told her just leave and drive home. I listened in on the conversation. When Jan left the bathroom, the man was no longer anywhere to be seen in the bar, which I'm sure she found to be a relief. She went straight to her car and started driving home. It's a very linear and short path from that bar, and she was home in probably a couple minutes. When she pulled up in the driveway and started walking to the front door, she noticed another car pull up across the street. It didn't stop directly in front of the house across the street. It stopped one house over. Jan came inside, and from here on, I can tell the story from my own point of view. Maria and I came to greet Jan and ask her what happened. She went to the window and creased the blinds to look outside. She told us there was a car out there before, and she was worried it followed her. But when all 3 of us looked through the blinds, we didn't see a car out there. So she told us the unsettling story of what happened at the bar. Maria did a better job at comforting her than I. Girl thing, I guess. I did tell her that if that man ever stepped foot near her again, I'd kick his ass. Later on, we all went to our rooms and did our own thing. I was playing Far Cry 4 on my computer when I heard the horrible sound of both my sisters screaming. And let me shift back to Jan's perspective for a second. She was on her phone in bed when she got a text from that number. It said, "Hey, I'm so sorry, I didn't see your text until I got to the bar." Jan didn't answer that, so he sent a follow-up text saying, "I'm gonna meet you at your house. Which window is yours?" Jan called Maria to come to her room to look at the text. As they talked for a little bit, figuring out what to do, Jan's window slid open and someone tried pushing their way through the roller shade. That was when both Maria and Jan screamed, causing not only me, but our parents from upstairs to come rushing to her room. The man trying to come in gave up before we even made it to the room. Our dad went outside to try and chase after the man, but he was already long gone in his car probably. Of course, my dad called the cops to get a police report. Jen gave the police the man's cell phone number, and they took records of the text conversation. They said they were going to do what they could to trace the number, though it could take a few days. My dad was contacted after the weekend by the local police station, and they asked him to come in. At the station, they said they traced the number to be a fake number through some app, and that there was no guarantee they could trace the use back to a specific phone. My dad asked them to do whatever they could. Weeks passed and we never heard from the police, but we all slowly started to forget about it. You can never really understand people's motives and how they think they'll get away with some things, like climbing into a girl's window, for instance. I've been using the app Hinge to meet new people in the town I just recently moved to. I matched this girl, Kate. She was about 7 years older than me. Yeah, I know, a bit of a gap. She's 30, I'm 23. It was my idea to meet her at some small restaurant in town. I waited in my car in the parking lot for her to pull up. For some reason, she was having trouble finding the place, and she asked me to start sharing my location with her. After doing so, she shortly after pulled up in some lemon of a car, an old beater Honda. I actually felt a sense of disappointment when I saw it was her stepping out of it. I went out to hug her hello. She said she wasn't a hugger though, so I shamefully put my arms back down. Bad start, I was thinking in my head. When we sat down at a table inside, I was able to see that she looked different from her pictures. Worse. Like, she was the girl in the pictures, sure, but it seemed as though she had her pictures doctored up to make her look better. She also looked to be older than 30. I was already not feeling this date, but I couldn't just end it now. I'd have to sit through the dinner with her. When the waitress came to start us off with drinks, Kate was really awkward. Like the way her voice suddenly raised in volume and intensity as she spoke to the waitress. She stuttered as she kind of rudely said she just wanted water. She turned down my offer for wine. So I went through the whole dinner with her, and in my head I was really just thinking about how excited I was to get out of there. The check came, and I waited to see if she'd make any offer to chip in for it since I really had no plans of seeing her again. But she did not, so I paid the check and we grabbed our coats and left. I told her I had a really nice time and whatever. Seemed she didn't really want to go home though. I had to kind of force myself to break off because I really just wanted to go home. I said bye and got in my car. She didn't say bye back, she instead just walked to her car. I drove home to my apartment, which is the lower half of someone's house. I didn't even finish hanging up my coat before the doorbell rang. I checked through the window who it could be, and it was Kate. I hadn't stopped sharing my location with her. What could she want? I hadn't forgotten anything at the restaurant, and even if I had, she could have texted me. It was then that I realized this woman might actually be nuts. I walked away from the door and hid in the kitchen with the lights off. I got a text from Kate saying, "I know you're home." I replied, "What do you want? Why are you here?" She texted back, "Answer." I didn't answer that time. I stayed in the kitchen and waited there for a while, until she texted again saying, "I see you at the table, let me in now." She knew I was sitting there. She could see me. In a panic, I looked at all the windows, till I saw the one. It was one of the backyard windows, where I hadn't lowered the shade all the way down. And through that little opening at the bottom, I saw her eyes creeping in. Freaking out, I went to my room and stayed in there with the lights off, while I called 911 to report a trespassing. I had the call on speakerphone so I could read the insane text Kate was sending me. One of her texts said, "Nobody wants me, I'm sick of it." Another said, "You're just like the others." Then I heard the sound of glass being broken outside my room. I ran to lock my bedroom door and told the operator that she was breaking into my house. The woman on the line said to wait in my room and grab something to use as a weapon. She said the cops would be there shortly. Kate tried the doorknob to my room, and when it wouldn't open, started pounding angrily, yelling for me to open up. I told the 911 operator to send the cops in through the back, as that was how she broke in.
Luckily, this town seems to have a fast 911 response time, because cops were there in minutes. 3 cop cars, actually. I heard the cops talking with her, telling her to calm down. That was when I opened the door to see 4 cops around her, with her being already in cuffs. She was taken away and charged with breaking and entering and some other charges. I had the option to take her to civil court for damages to my property, but the time and lawyer fees would be more than the cost to just fix the window, so that's what I did. I did get a restraining order against Kate though, who I later learned her real name was actually Pamela Castillo. It was my first date with a girl from an online dating website. I offered to have her over and cook for her. I'd been out of the dating scene for a long time since I recently broke up with my girlfriend at the time. The woman's name was Amelia. She was 26. I was 32 at the time. I didn't really think having her over for dinner before meeting her was weird. If anything, it would be more relaxed and comfortable than meeting at some bar or restaurant. I was cooking some penne alla vodka with garlic bread and wine, my favorite combo. Amelia arrived around 6:30. I welcomed her in and asked her to take a seat at one end of the kitchen table. I was finishing up the food as I tried to get to know her. She wasn't as talkative as I was expecting based on her appearance. I had to lead most of the conversation. I was slightly nervous given that it was my first time having a first date in years, and it didn't help that she wasn't exactly the easiest to talk to. I served her a plate of food and a glass of wine. Then she asked something odd. She wanted me to go get a candle so that we could have a proper cheers. I had nothing else to say but to go along with it. I left the kitchen to the pantry closet in the hallway to get one of the candles and a lighter. When I came back to the kitchen, I spotted Amelia sitting back down, like very quick-like. It looked kind of sketchy. "Everything okay?" I asked. To which she replied she just had to rinse her hands. Odd, because I didn't hear the sink run. But I moved past it and lit the candle. Then we did a little cheers. I was about to take a sip of my wine when I noticed something floating in the glass, something that wasn't in it before. It looked like a powdery substance being dissolved into the wine. I watched as she looked at me, not taking a sip of my wine. I pretended to take a sip and nervously continued conversation. I was assuming the worst, that she tried to drug me, but I couldn't just accuse her of that. What if I was wrong? I'd look crazy. We ate our food and I cleaned up the table afterwards. She excused herself to the bathroom, which I pointed her to. She was gone for a while, but when she came back, she said she had to get going because her dog was sick. I had no problem with her leaving. I walked her out and hugged her goodbye. I went back to the glass of wine and smelt it, but it didn't smell like anything except wine. I dumped it and made sure nothing was stolen from the kitchen to the hallway to the bathroom. After cleaning, I watched TV while telling my friends that I think she tried to drug me. Then I went to sleep. Actually, I didn't sleep. I have acute insomnia, which comes on and off, and this was one night I just couldn't get shut-eye. I rolled from one side of the bed to the other for hours, and it must have been like 2:30 or something when I heard a cup fall from my kitchen. That terrified me because, well, cups are pretty stationary objects. I didn't see why or how one could have fallen from the counter. Suddenly my door opened and someone stepped inside. I didn't move. I pretended to be asleep, but with one eye half open. Someone stood in front of the doorway for a few seconds, then left the room. I waited a minute before getting up to follow and hopefully get the kitchen phone to call the police. There was a glimmer of light in the living room from the street light outside. With that, I was able to see her body in the corner of the room. She wasn't ducking, nothing. She was just idly staying in place. "Amelia," I said, afraid of what would happen next. She was standing by the knife holder. "Amelia, if you leave right now, I won't call the cops." There was this awful, chilling silence before she put something back on the counter, walked to the back door, and exited. What she put back on the counter turned out to be a knife. When she left, I locked the door first thing, of course. I think when she asked to use the bathroom, she unlocked the back door with plans of returning. This was after her plan to drug me failed. Of course, I called the police, and they took the knife for fingerprints. Based off her criminal background, police later showed up to Amelia's house and arrested her. I did not press charges.
I'll never forget the time my sister Danielle and I were home alone one Friday night when our parents were out. I was 12 and she was 13. We have an average-sized house, but you can hear everything going on in there. For example, you could be on the top floor and hear someone talking down in the den. We were both doing our own things in our rooms upstairs. That's when I heard it. A slight tapping coming from downstairs in the den. I soon realized it sounded like tapping on the back door. I assumed it was Danielle, so I went down to the den. It was too dark outside to see who was out there, so I flipped on the outside light. It wasn't my sister, but a random guy. He looked mid-40s, long black hair, graying a bit, red cheeks, probably 6'1". Being that this was our backyard door and some stranger was standing on the outside of it, I almost ran away. But the guy was staring at me with a kind of unintimidating look, as if he needed help. I slightly pushed the door window screen open so he could talk to me. He told me he needed to use our phone. I asked him why and why he was in our backyard. He disregarded what I had said and pleaded for me to let him in. I told him sorry and asked him to leave before I would call the cops. I tried to slide the door window back up, but he actually blocked it with his arm and began reaching into my house trying to unlock the door. When I cried for my sister, the guy pulled his arm away. I ran upstairs where I met my sister halfway. She took a peek through the den stairway to the back door and saw the guy standing there still. She called our parents. They told us to call the police and to stay upstairs. We both stayed in our rooms for a while. There was no more tapping or anything, so me being my 12-year-old self trying to be brave, I went downstairs to the den. He wasn't standing by the door anymore, but the door window was lower than when I had left it. Then I realized I didn't shut it in the first place. I walked closer to the door and then looked to my left. The door to the office was now open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. It was too dark to see anything inside, and there was no way I was going in there. I took out my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, and pressed the button. As the phone took the picture, the flash from the camera provided enough light to see the guy who was standing at the door was now hunched over my office desk, and in the picture his head was turned to be facing me. I didn't know if he was running at me or not, but I felt like he was, and I ran upstairs and locked the den door. A familiar light tapping began coming from the den door now, and I could hear the man on the other side begging me to open it. I cried for my sister again and bluffed to the man saying the cops were here. After that he stopped, and I could hear the back door open and shut. It may have been stupid to say that, as it ruined any chances of the man getting caught and arrested, but it may have also saved our lives, as the cops did not arrive for another 5 minutes. This story is told under the author's father's point of view. Me and my girlfriend's brother had been talking about hunting, and I decided to take him on a hunting trip. It was his first time going, so I wanted to take him somewhere where I was sure he would get a deer. So I asked my uncle if we could go to his place, and he told me we could stay there for the weekend. I told him that was perfect and that we'd stay. Me and Adam got our stuff together and headed that way. It was a secluded property right smack dab in the middle of nowhere in Braxton County, West Virginia. We got to my uncle's. He had his truck started and told them to hop in. We get in, and I ask him where we're going. He told me to my hunting cabin about 10-15 miles out. When we finally made it to the cabin, it fell below our expectations. 2 rooms, very small. As soon as we unloaded our stuff, he was gone. He told us to have fun and waved goodbye from his truck. Later, when we were getting settled for the night, we realized there were no curtains or lights, just lanterns. We didn't like being so exposed, so we hung clothes over the windows. Not long after, we climbed into bed. Then within a few minutes, there was a noise outside, like metal trash cans being banged against one another. Adam started to get paranoid until I said, "It's probably just a bear or something, go back to sleep." I told Adam, "Don't wake me up unless the cabin's on fire." I went back to sleep, at least until Adam started shaking me, saying, "Cliff, wake up, there's someone outside." "No, go back to sleep, there's no..." I stopped, because on the outside wall, besides Adam's bed, a noise, almost like someone or something was raking its claws or nails all the way down the side of the cabin and stopped at the far window. The noise was followed by tapping on the window. Neither of us wanted to move the clothes to see what it was. I told Adam to load his gun, as I did myself. We stayed up all night and left in the morning. We questioned my uncle if he was playing a trick on us. He didn't have a clue what we were talking about. The author says his dad never went back to that cabin. The picture attached was taken by his uncle before he left them, and you could see the cabin in the background. I was 19 years old at the time, working at a sketchy motel. The motel was pretty run down, and the majority of people who stayed there were locals that were just doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. Let's just say the cops came by multiple times a week. I worked as both a front desk person, checking in these creeps all hours of the night, and as a housekeeper who got to clean up their nasty, vomit-smelling rooms afterwards. One afternoon, I was working as a housekeeper in the second building of the motel on the backside furthest from the office. I hated working over there because it not only had the most worn-down rooms, but it was always pretty vacant over there and way too quiet for comfort. I began cleaning one of my last rooms and wanted to get done in a hurry because it was getting late. I was washing the mirror in the room that I was cleaning when all of a sudden, I saw a man in the reflection staring at me. He was mid-50s, dirty, with long, greasy hair. Startled, I screamed, "Oh my God." I told him he scared me. The room I was currently cleaning was vacant, so there was no reason why this man should have been in there watching me clean. However, we just had a meeting on customer satisfaction, and my boss was really pressuring us to be more polite and help the guests any way we could. Sir?" I asked him cautiously. Can I get you anything? Towels?" The man just stared back at me with a crooked grin and held out his hands to me. I thought maybe he was handing me a tip for cleaning his room earlier, but when I looked down, I saw he was holding a $100 bill. Alarms started going off in my head. No one tips $100 on a $40 a night room. The man just smiled and said his name was Terry. He said he was staying in the room next door with his wife Sherry and sort of joked about their names rhyming. He smelled like car oil and alcohol. When I asked him why he was trying to hand me $100, he laughed deep in his throat and said, "Me and my wife were watching you, and we just wanted to have fun with you." I felt like my heart jumped into my throat. No, I can't do that, sir, I'm sorry." I wanted to run out of the room screaming, but he was blocking the door, my only exit. The man smiled again, taking on a softer tone of voice, and invited me to come into his room to meet his wife, just to talk as friends. I nervously told him no again, and that I had a lot of work to do for the day. I prayed to God he would just go away, and eventually he did. He grunted and walked off in what I assumed to be the direction of his room. My mind began racing. There is no wife, I thought. This man could try and kidnap me. I was 110 pounds at the time and not very strong. He could easily overpower me. I locked the room from the inside and went directly to the phone to call my manager at the front desk, but the phone wasn't working. Adrenaline began pumping through my veins, and despite what I was always told not to do, I was panicking. Did he cut the line? No, I thought. This is a crappy motel. It happens all the time. But I just have to get out. I remembered that I had my cell phone out on my housekeeping card, but that was outside the locked door. I'd have to open the door to get it. I cautiously opened the door to the room that I was cleaning and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I frantically began searching my cart for my cell phone. I was wasting too much time looking for it, so I just decided to run as fast as I could and make a break for the front desk in the office. Then from behind me, I heard the man again, but this time he was screaming to someone else, "She's running, she's getting away." I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement after me. I quickly turned the corner, grabbed my keycard, and let myself into a stockroom and locked the door. Within moments, I heard the sound of the dirty guy and someone else running outside, searching for me. I stayed in that stockroom for 30 minutes shaking until I could no longer hear him searching for me. I finally got the courage to run the rest of the way to the front desk. When I made it there, I collapsed into my boss's arms and he called the police. The man and whoever else was in the room with him peeled out before the cops could arrive, and I was beyond shaken up. According to the police who ran a search, this wasn't the first time he had done something like this, and he was actually wanted for sexual assault, gross sexual imposition, and in the past was once charged with rape. A few weeks later, on what happened to be my birthday, this guy was caught. A few weeks after that, I quit. I will never again work at another motel.
I used to play basketball back in high school. I was never really too good or anything. I just played so I could say I played a sport and to put something on my college resume. This one particular game, we were playing some nearby school, I can't remember the name of it, but we were home. This wasn't a very important game, so not a lot of people were watching the bleachers. I think we were down like 22-13 when some kid on the other team started trash talking me and a few of my teammates, but mostly me, making fun of my size and my hair. It got to the point where after every shot I missed, the kid would throw some wise-ass comment my way. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore and I shoved the kid as hard as I could. He fell on his back, sliding off the court. My teammates held his teammates back from attacking me as the ref blew his whistle and ejected me from the game. I didn't care, it felt way too good to feel bad about it. I walked right past my coach, not even batting an eye, and went straight for the locker room. The door was locked for some reason. I didn't want to have to awkwardly ask my coach to go unlock it, so I went outside and went around to the other side of the boys' locker room where there was an outside entrance. Strangely, that one was open. That door was never left open. As I stepped into the locker room, I realized it was as cold in there as it was outside. The door must have been open all game. The lights also weren't on, and I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't use the flashlight or anything. I shut the back entrance door and began feeling around the walls like a blind person, looking for the light switch. Over the sound of my skin rubbing against the brick wall, I heard a locker click. The sound of one of the lockers closing. I confidently called out, "Who's there?" assuming it was one of my teammates. No reply. It was dark in there, but not the kind of dark where you can't see anything. I began a slow walk down past the aisles, scanning each one for anybody who could have made that sound. And all the while I heard footsteps in the room, so I knew I wasn't alone. I got to the last aisle and saw for a mere second at the opposite side of the aisle someone really big moving behind the lockers as if they were hiding. I felt my heart skip a beat and was officially freaked out. So I decided to just leave and wait for the game to end to get my stuff. I made my way to the main entrance and tried to pull the door open, but it was locked from the inside too. I found the light switch right next to the door though, and the return of light made me feel a little better. With the light on, I gained the confidence to just confront whoever was in the locker room. Again, I started doing laps around the locker aisles, but I didn't see anyone. However, I still heard the footsteps opposite me wherever I went. If I was in one aisle, I heard the footsteps exactly opposite me in the next aisle over. I continuously called out, "Who's there?" I never even got so much as a cough in response. I became almost out of breath walking and running around the aisles so much. I then looked at the lockers and realized that in between them were tiny holes in which you could see over to the next aisle. I had an idea. I could peek through one of those holes and see who was on the other side. And so I quietly got on my knees and put my eye up to one of the holes. At first, all I thought I saw on the other side was darkness, as if something were blocking it. But I quickly realized what it was. What I was looking at through that hole was an eye. I ran out that back door quicker than I'd ever run in any of my games. When I went up to my coach, who understandably looked annoyed at me, I told him there was someone in the locker room. At first he assumed it was just the janitor, but after I convinced him it wasn't, he looked at me with a look on his face that told me he believed me. After the next call, he told the refs to pause the game, that there might be an intruder in the locker room. Half of my team and the coach went in to investigate, but by that time whoever was in there was gone. I didn't feel stupid or anything, as everyone seemed to believe me. I mean, the room was freezing and the back door was still open, for crying out loud. What we did find out at the end of the game, however, was that 4 of my teammates were missing their clothes from their lockers. All of them from the freshman locker aisle. I think I figured out what kind of person I was in that locker room with, and I'm just happy I never caught him. My brother's a hockey player, but he's only 13 years old, so I have to drive him to his games and practices a lot. His team always plays in an outdoor rink, so it usually gets really cold out. A couple weeks ago, I took my brother to his game, and since I usually get bored when I stay at his games, I took my girlfriend Michelle to watch with me. My brother's team was down like 4-0 by the end of the first period, and we really weren't enjoying it anymore, so me and Michelle decided to go to a more private location, not for anything sexual, just to smoke the stuff we brought with us. She's not a big smoker, but I'm usually able to convince her to light up with me. The park that this rink is in is very foresty. About half of it is nothing but dense forest. Locals call it the Burning Woods for obvious reasons. Me and Michelle found a good spot behind a few big trees, and a few moments later, after lighting the bowl, we heard footsteps approaching us. I put the lighter and pipe away quicker than I even had time to think about it. We heard a chuckle as 2 guys lower to mid-20s came into light. One of them had a painfully cliched mohawk with a green stripe and black fuzzy hair beneath. The other a big bald guy with a goatee. The guy with the mohawk laughed and said, "It's cool, don't worry about it. You got enough for 2 more?" My first instinct was to say, "Piss off, I'm spending time with my girlfriend." But for some reason the words that came out were, "Yeah, I think so." I'm a serious coward. I always think of appropriate things to say in my head, but I never gather the courage to actually say it. After I said yeah, he told me he was just kidding, but that he had some super dope Durban poison or something in his car if we were interested. I looked at Michelle, who shrugged her shoulders, but I knew deep down she didn't want to go with them, just like I didn't. I then looked in the direction of the hockey game. I told them, "Nah, it's okay, we were just finishing up anyway." The guy just nodded his head and said, "Oh." He stuck out his hand for a goodbye high five / handshake, and I shook his hand. I directed Michelle back in the direction of the hockey rink. We both agreed that those guys were weird. We stopped when we thought they were far away. It's not like there wasn't any point in not smoking just because of that encounter. I gave Michelle the pipe and lighter, and as she flicked it, I could swear I heard footsteps moving through the leaves again. I did a quick side glance about 2 o'clock, and I knew he was there. The guy with the green mohawk. He was standing behind a tree with his head just kind of peering out from it. I did that thing with my eyes, looking over in that direction to kind of hint at it to Michelle. I didn't want to confront the guy because at this point I knew something was wrong with these guys. And as I was already having no part of this, we both heard a stick snap from right behind the tree we were standing by. I pulled Michelle with me as we walked back closer to the hockey rink and back into the lights. At this point I lost interest in smoking. I just wanted to go back to the safety of the bleachers. We made it past the tree line and back onto the path when we heard one of the guys call out, "Hey, come back." We turned around and there they were. The two guys standing by the edge of the tree line, maybe 20 feet away from us, with haunting smiles on their faces. And then I looked past them and saw a third guy behind them, half covered by a tree. "No, it's okay guys, thanks," I yelled back.
It wasn't a request.
Those words hit me like a bullet. I dared not turn around. I simply nudged Michelle forward even faster to the bleachers that were now only about 50 feet away. I feared if I turned around I'd see a gun or something in his hands. We made it back safely to the bleachers with the feeling of comfort being around other people. The game ended and my brother's team lost 9-5. My brother stayed after a bit to speak with his coach, who was offering him a position on his other team, and by the time he was done, just about everyone had already left. With 3 cars in the parking lot, we all got into my truck and went home. But on the way out of the parking lot, I noticed immediately that the car behind us was tailgating and then shortly after started honking. I knew it was them. It had to be. They must have waited for us in their car. Why were they targeting us specifically? We didn't do anything. By a lucky break though, we didn't even have to drive all the way down the street. Parked on the corner of a side road, seemingly waiting to give tickets to unsuspecting drivers, was a Ford Explorer police car. We pulled up next to it and the car behind us kept driving past. The cop rolled down his window and we pointed at the car, telling him that those guys were harassing us. All the cop did was nod his head and say okay before rolling up his window. I took that as our cue to drive away, but I drove slowly hoping to see his car turn on along with his lights. They didn't. For whatever reason, he didn't care to chase them down. 2 weeks later, it still bothers me every day, and this whole situation still scares me every day. All my life, I'll never forget this experience. I've always had a close group of friends who I could relate to and that we all loved baseball. 6 of us were on the same team in a league, while all 8 of us consistently played pickup baseball with each other. We lived in the country, and there was this really low-key, convenient little clearing in the woods which had a baseball field and a basketball court. I shit you not, it was almost like our own little private park. Nobody else was ever there, mostly because nobody knew about it. It was off some dead-end dirt road with nothing on it, and it was surrounded by nothing but forest. We were all 11 or 12 years old at the time, and living in the country you tend to have parents who are a little more lenient with letting you out unsupervised. At least that's how it was for us. This field was about a quarter mile away from my house, so I always walked with my baseball bag containing my bat, glove, and a few extra balls. This was the day that ruined it for our whole group in this park. It was a Friday night, middle of July, so the sky was turning that deep orange as the sun was setting. That meant our game had to be wrapping up soon. I was coincidentally up at bat when 2 of my friends who were out at field pointed to something. We all turned and saw a huge group of men entering the little clearing and sitting down on a nearby bench. There were 6 men. I guess thinking back now, I'd say they were in their 20s or 30s at the time. I wouldn't say that they had a gang-like appearance, but they sure didn't look like guys you'd want to run into in a dark alley. The disturbing part was that they all either sat or stood there just watching our group playing baseball, and I could see and hear them laughing and making a lot of noise. We all looked at each other and kind of mutually agreed to pack up, since it was getting late anyway. As we all started putting our stuff in our bags, they all started calling out, "Aw, don't leave." As we all high-fived each other saying our goodbyes, we looked back at the bench, and we got scared when we saw all 6 men were now standing up, still watching us. You may think this sounds dumb, how a group of 8 kids would get scared because some people entered a park, but you don't understand the way they were intently staring at us. Now here was the bad part. I usually tended to walk alone since my house was in a different direction of everyone else. I asked my friend Jordan to kind of escort me out of the clearing and to the dirt path that I walked on just so it wouldn't be so obvious that I'm walking alone. Then I gave him a high five and we went our separate ways. It was getting really dark now, in the woods especially. That's why I always kept a flashlight in my baseball bag. Every click and every snap in the woods made me shine my light over in paranoia. My heart was actually racing. I just wanted to get home safely and get to my nice warm bed. Each step in the dirt seemed to become louder and louder as I became more sensitive to the sounds around me. I felt sweat dripping down my cheek as I heard laughter and screaming in the near distance, not of my friends but of grown men. I picked up the pace, thus causing a few of the spare baseballs to fall out of my bag, which I had apparently forgotten to zip up. I sighed in annoyed breath, dropped the bag, and hurriedly looked for the balls with my flashlight. The subsequent snapping of leaves and twigs from behind me made my heart drop. I turned and shined my light to reveal a tall man in a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood covering his face, inching his way closer to me. Only after I revealed him in the light, he wasn't inching anymore. He was full on running toward me. I felt life almost escape me as I ran for my life, dropping the flashlight and leaving all my baseball gear behind. I could hear my chaser behind me all the way until I saw the light from my house. I screamed for my mom and dad, and that's when I heard my chaser turn around. My mom and dad were hysterical in reaction to what I told them, and called all 7 of my friends' parents asking if their kids were alright and explaining the situation. Thankfully, all of my friends made it home okay that night, though my friend Jordan was actually followed briefly as well. He told me he wasn't chased after he started running though. After this incident, all of our parents stopped allowing us to go to that field. We still live in the same house, and it still makes me a bit uncomfortable knowing that one of those men, therefore all of them, know where I live.
The new year is coming up, and a lot of people are looking to break their bad habits with a New Year's resolution that probably won't last long. There's a more efficient way to break your bad habits. I'm talking about today's sponsor, Fume. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all-natural, delicious flavors. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. It fills the void in a natural, guilt-free way. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. There's tons of flavors, and crisp mint is my favorite so far, and orange vanilla is a close second. The look and feel of the real wood and the shape makes you feel like you're really holding a quality piece. Stopping a bad habit is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Head to tryfume.com/nightmare or scan the QR code and use code NIGHTMARE to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. I own 3 pieces of real estate, 2 of which I rent out on Airbnb. The third property is my house in Montreal where I live. Where this story took place was my rental property in Wakefield, Quebec. It's a comfy small home in the woods that's advertised as such. It's a 2-bedroom, but since it's a small house, it's geared more towards couples. Sometimes I'll have groups of 4 or more staying there. Those are the groups I usually worry about because they're the ones who could do damage. With the couples, they usually clean up pretty well after themselves, and I trust a cleaning lady to go take care of the place afterwards. After a bigger group stay, I usually take the drive over there myself to clean and make sure nothing was damaged or stolen. It's only about 2 hours, and when I do decide to take the drive there, I'll most often stay the night there anyway. This was after a bigger group stayed for a weekend, so I wanted to go up there and just clean and check on the place. I let my nearest neighbor know I was heading up there for the day. Like me, he's also hardly ever there, so when I do go up there, I reach out to him to see if there's anything he wants me to bring around back, like his mail or packages. He texted back pretty quickly that he won't be up there this week, and he'd appreciate it if I could check if there's mail from a specific person. So on my way to his house, I pulled up his driveway to his mailbox. As I walked over to it, I saw footprints in the snow alongside the house. Before investigating that, I checked his mailbox, and there were just a few junky-looking envelopes, like credit card offers. I told him there's no mail from the person he mentioned, and then I let him know that someone had walked on his property. It wasn't the mailman because the footsteps came from the woods, approached the window, and then walked around to the back. He called me, and he told me to check where the footprints led to. I followed them all around the house, and then they led off into the woods on the other side of the house. He said as long as they didn't break in, I don't give a shit. So I left and drove the remaining minute up the hill to my house. The second I got out of the car, I noticed a bunch of footprints in the snow around the property. The guests left a couple days ago, and it had snowed there the day before I arrived, so it was a little interesting that their footprints didn't fill in yet. There was more snow coming tonight, so they'd surely be filled by tomorrow. The first thing I did was change the security lock on the front door for the next visitors. Walking into the house, it was kind of a mess. They left the sink full of dishes and glasses, the garbage bin was full, and cans of pop and beer were everywhere. Some guests are like this because they figure, hey, we're paying a cleaning fee anyway. I triple-checked everything to make sure nothing was taken or missing, and then I began cleaning. I had music playing as I cleaned, but even over the music, I heard something from outside. My house is all the way up on a hill surrounded by woods. No one should ever be here. I turned off the radio, and I heard footsteps in the snow right outside the house. They just passed a window, now going to the backyard. I went to make sure I locked the front door, and then I didn't make any noise. Whoever was out there had to know I was here because my car was out front. After like 20 minutes of sitting in the living room, I decided to get up and go outside to look around. Sure enough, there was a fresh trail of footprints circling the house. I followed them all around the house, and then they seemed to just stop or overlap in the back of the house, by the window air conditioning unit. I looked out to the woods, feeling like someone was just out there watching. So I went back inside and didn't go outside again that day. I ordered a lot of food on Grubhub that took forever to be delivered, which ended up being my late lunch and dinner. How I spent the rest of my day after cleaning and doing the laundry was just working remotely on my laptop. It was snowing again outside, and it was supposed to snow all night, meaning I'd definitely have some people looking to rent the next few days for the cozy factor. That's usually how it goes. After I was done with work and it was like 8 o'clock, I started watching a movie, and during the movie, I was hearing these creaks and cracks in the ceiling that I'd never heard before. There's no attic, so it was weird. My only idea was that it could be the weight of the fresh snow on the roof. After the movie, I went to bed. I could hear the sound of the snowflakes hitting the windowsill outside. It was so peaceful. But that unsettling sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. The realization that someone was outside this late at night was horrific. The footsteps passed my window, then faded away. I was sitting on the edge of my bed for like 20 minutes, waiting for any kind of sound like one of the doors being shimmied with or something. Anything that would shift me from awareness mode to full-on defense mode. It was a long while of silence before I went outside in my coat and shoes with a baseball bat, and I walked around the house. There was once again another fresh trail of footprints, but this time they started at the air conditioning unit, and they walked away towards the woods. I then put it together that someone was likely on my roof before, and they climbed up and down via the window AC unit. I went back inside and decided to call the police. A Wakefield police officer came to the house maybe 20 minutes later. We looked outside together. He even climbed up onto the roof and told me there were indeed footprints and such on the roof that would suggest that someone had been up there. He was very nice and reassuring, telling me he wouldn't be far away if I heard them come back. I also told him about the similar footprints at my neighbor's house, just as a warning in case this person or group of people is targeting multiple houses for whatever they're doing. As he left, he said he'd be in the area. The next morning I left, and I rented the place out to a group of guests a few days later. They didn't report anything out of the ordinary. Thankfully, this was only an isolated incident that happened over a year ago. This is something that happened when I was, of course, home alone when I was a kid. I was in the 7th grade. My parents just recently started leaving me home alone. I would just play video games when they would be away. One night my parents were out doing whatever and I was alone, playing video games. We had the video games in the basement so that my older brother and I could share it, and our dad didn't want the video games in the living room. The basement at my parents' house is pretty big, but also as little kids it scared the crap out of my brother and I. Where when it was time to go upstairs, we'd flick the light and spring up the stairs as if demons were chasing us. At 12, I obviously wasn't as scared as I was as a little kid, but I would still look over my shoulder every once in a while when I was down there alone, especially if I was home alone. I was playing whatever video game I played at the time, when bang, there was this crash at the basement window. I damn near jumped out of my seat as I turned around to look at the window. It sounded like someone hit their fist on the window. It was kind of dark out since it was cloudy and snowing outside. I looked at the window and noticed there were some snow particles on the window. It looked like a piece of snow might have hit it. My initial thoughts was that it was a falling icicle hitting the window. I tried to go back to playing video games, but the icicle theory melted when there was another loud bang on the glass. I stood up this time and looked closer at the window. There were even more particles of snow in the glass now. Someone was out there throwing snowballs at the window. I knew it had to be my brother Keith. I went upstairs into the backyard door. I opened the interior door and looked out through the glass exterior door. The brick wall to the left blocked view of the entire backyard, so I opened the door and stepped into the yard with only a pair of slides on my feet. The cold snow and air was blowing in my face as I stepped down the 2 steps to the ground level and looked beyond the brick wall. I called Keith's name and said, "Why didn't you tell me you're coming home tonight?" I saw someone in the bushes in front of the back fence. They were clearly hiding. I said, "Keith, I see you." But the more I looked, the more scared I got, questioning if that was actually Keith. I went back inside and locked the door. I went straight to the phone and called my mom to ask her if Keith is supposed to be home. She told me no, he's at his friend's house for the night. Right at that moment, another snowball. I asked my mom if she heard that, and she said yes. I told her there's someone in the backyard throwing snowballs at the windows. She now put me on speaker so my dad could talk too. My dad asks if it's some kids messing around, and I said I don't know. I was just a kid, and I was freaking out. I asked, "When are you guys going to be home?" And they said soon, they're already on their way home. I remembered my mom telling me to not let them know I'm home, but I said they already know because I went outside into the yard. So she told me to just wait upstairs in my room with the door locked, and she was going to call the police for me. And that's what I did. I went to my room and kept the lights off. It was getting darker out, but when I looked out my window, I could still see. There was someone walking around the backyard. They were looking through the downstairs windows, and then I saw them knocking on the kitchen window, the one they threw the snowball at minutes ago. They thought I was still in there because the light was left on. Whoever it was, they weren't a kid. They looked too tall. Maybe they were an older teenager or something, but I couldn't tell because they had a jacket or a coat on with the hood up. I kept watching, and I saw they tried lifting open the window downstairs. Obviously in the dead of winter, those windows hadn't been unlocked for months. But one thing was for sure, they were trying to get into the house. He then started looking up at the upstairs windows, and that's when I ducked down. I didn't look out the window again. There was a crash at my bedroom window now. He must have seen me. He threw a few snowballs at the windows in my room, and then it just stopped. My mom called me back to make sure I'm okay and tell me that the police are on their way. It took a long time, probably because of the conditions, but the doorbell eventually rang, and so I went down to confirm it was the police before letting the police officer in. It was a lone female cop, probably in her 40s. She walked around the property with her flashlight as I stayed inside and watched through the windows. She checked the bushes, the shed, and the patio. When she came back front, she said there were footprints all over the yard, but that there's definitely no one out there. Not anymore, at least. She spoke to my mom on the phone for a few minutes, and then she told me that she's going to wait here until my parents got home. At the end of the day, my parents showed up, the cop left, and I was okay. It may have just been some weirdo or some teenagers playing some messed up prank, though the guy trying to open the window makes me think otherwise. If it were an attempted break-in, it was clearly the dumbest attempt ever after alerting me with the snowballs. I think it was someone that was just trying to scare me, just to be a twisted individual. Many years ago, I went with my girlfriend Trish, my friend John, and his girlfriend Katie to the Colorado Rockies in the dead of winter. John is a longtime friend of mine who I love to do outdoor activities with, like hiking, snowboarding, and mountaineering. John's family owns a cabin there, so we stayed there for a couple nights. We picked a weekend with snow in the forecast. When we arrived to the cabin, there was already snow on the ground, but there was more snow in the forecast for the next day. The first night we got there, we all unwinded by jumping in the hot tub and having wine. The cabin is very remote in the middle of the woods. There were small snow flurries falling from the sky that night while we were in the hot tub. It was a sign of what was to come tomorrow. The next day, we all woke up to see it lightly snowing outside, lighter than the forecast had let on. Not much new snow had accumulated on the ground yet, but we still held out hope that it would continue to snow throughout the day. John fueled up the quad his family had in the big shed out back. We had to jump it with my car initially, but when it was up and running, we took turns riding it around the trails on his property. This went on for hours, as his property is massive. It has big openings perfect for drifting and doing donuts, and then it has tight, winding trails to ride through. Throughout this foggy day, it was snowing, but earlier in the day, it was a light snowfall. John rode around with Katie for a while Trish and I were outside sledding down this big hill on the property. After a while of this, we all went out for lunch. I took my pickup truck there, so getting around in the snow wasn't an issue. By the time we got back, the girls were ready for a nap. John and I said screw that, and we put on our hiking gear and went into the woods, climbing one of the trails we had been riding around on the quad. This trail went way up the mountain though, past John's property, so we began to climb. Both of us are really fit, so we're used to this kind of thing, but for the average person, hiking an uphill in the snow with heavy boots on can get very tiring. We hiked for about half an hour to an hour up the mountain before we made it near to the top, or at the very least we stopped at a spot that would have been an amazing view if it weren't so foggy and snowy. All we could see was white. We took a break up here though and sat in the snow. The snow was starting to come down a lot harder now. The forecast was right. I asked John for like the third time, "Are you sure you know how to get back?" And he said yes, absolutely. So he led the way back down the mountain. It was a full-on blizzard at this point, so we picked up the pace. Luckily, going down is a lot easier than going up. At some point as we were descending, I heard this moaning, humming type sound coming from behind us out of nowhere. I told John to stop and asked if he heard that. He said no. We stood still and waited. Then it happened again. There was this rumbling, moaning type sound coming from not far behind us. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human. We both turned and started going quicker down the mountain after hearing it. I said, "What is that?" And he said he has no idea. I started to hear footsteps from behind us. I said to John to stop again, and then we stopped and listened. You know how it's dead silent during a snowfall? Well, that's why it was so easy to hear footsteps from behind us. It was so foggy and the forest was so thick, however, that it was near impossible to see whoever it could have been. John said that was definitely not the sound of an animal, and no animals would be following us, especially when we're making noise. I suddenly felt a vibrating in my coat pocket. I took out my phone and saw Trish was suddenly blowing up my phone. She must have been trying to reach me, but I didn't have service until now, and all her texts sent at once. As we continued to walk, I took off my gloves so I could answer what she was saying, but as I read her texts, I started to worry. She was asking if that's John and I outside of the cabin, and that they're scared to go out there. I replied the best I could with my wet fingers, "What do you mean?" It didn't deliver. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. I lost reception again. I told John about the text, and said we have to hurry. All the while, we kept hearing humming and moaning sounds not far behind us. We were basically running at this point, all the way down back to the cabin. We finally saw the lights of the cabin through the quickly darkening woods. We got to the cabin and knocked on the door for the girls to let us in. Once inside, the two of them started talking over to each other, trying to explain what happened. Basically, what they told us was that they saw two people walking around outside like 10 minutes ago, one of them stopping by the window and looking in. They were too scared to go over and shut the blinds until we got back, so they stayed hidden in one of the rooms. John went to his dad's room to get a gun. All the blinds were closed now. The problem was we still had to go out for dinner, so John and I went outside after tensions cooled. He brought the gun with us. We looked around quick, then told the girls that it was clear to come to the car. We didn't bother telling the girls about the sounds in the woods because it would just further scare them. We went to a diner, then came right back. We skipped the hot tub tonight and instead had a movie night inside. It was interrupted by a loud and aggressive knock at the door. We all looked at one another, and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. John grabbed the gun off the table, and he came back over to us. Whoever was out there knocked again. John asked if he should threaten to shoot them. I said no, we should just remain quiet. There was never a third set of knocks. The girls went to the bedrooms, while John and I stayed in the living room, waiting in silence for about half an hour. He had the gun loaded, though I know he was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. The two of us opted to sleep in the living room that night so that we would be able to hear anything. We made it through the night. The next morning, we all packed up. I helped John clean up and put everything back into the shed outside. Then we left. But the really weird part was that there were no footprints at all in the snow outside the next day. It's possible that they were filled in by the new snow, but still, it seemed weird. Whatever was going on there that night couldn't have been good.
I'm part of this group that's centered around doing outdoorsy activities like hiking, snowboarding, mountain climbing, and so on. It started as a Facebook group and evolved into a closer-knit group of people, around 10 of us. Not all 10 or so people go to every outing, obviously. We once organized a trip to Adirondack Park where we could climb one of the many mountain trails. On this trip, it was only 4 of us, DeVito, James, and Christina. We brought sleeping bags and 2 tents. Since James and I were the only guys on this trip, we carried the extra weight of the tents in our bags. Because we wanted to experience this during the beautiful fall foliage, we went in the month of October. The weather was perfect, but still, once it started getting dark, we couldn't continue on the path, and we'd have to set up camp before it would get too dark to do even that. We set up camp on a hard rocky surface, and 3 of us started collecting wood for a little fire. James poured some lighter fluid into the pile of sticks and wood we collected, and that helped get it going. Sitting around the fire, we started to eat whatever foods we had packed while recounting about previous trips we'd taken together. That's when it first happened. A scream from the distance, a woman's scream. A scream that sounded as though someone was being attacked or feared for their lives echoed down the mountain. The 4 of us fell silent and looked at each other. Any of us who had food in our mouths had stopped chewing. We were all just frozen for a few seconds. The scream didn't repeat. We broke the silence by asking what we should do. We should have been alone this far into the trail. Then another sound echoed down the mountain, this one a loud popping sound. It didn't sound like a gunshot at all, but the best any of us could describe it was this high-pitched, loud, single popping sound. We now agreed to put the fire out and get in our tents. We didn't know who was out there or what was going on, and we didn't want to advertise our presence. I shared a tent with James while the girls shared the other tent. Falling asleep in a sleeping bag is always a tough task for me, and when you add hearing a blood-curdling scream out in the middle of nowhere not too far from you, it just makes it even harder. It was an hour or 2 that passed, and James seemed to have already fallen asleep. I was still rolling around from side to side, uncomfortable, when I heard another woman scream. This one was higher pitched and much, much closer. I sat up and looked at James, who was apparently woken up by the scream. We were scared to even leave the tent, because the scream was borderline right outside our campsite. We were discussing if we should wake the girls and pack it up and leave, but we'd have a long hike back in the dark ahead of us. We then heard footsteps outside our tent, the sound of shoes hitting the stone floor below us. I called both DeVito and Christina's names, expecting it to be them. But when they didn't answer and the footsteps stopped right outside the tent, I looked at James, who looked back at me with an equally horrified look on his face. Someone then started shaking our tent violently, and James and I started to scream, and we could hear the girls screaming in their tent as well in reaction to our screams. I said on the count of 3, we leave the tent and fight whoever was out there. I yelled my count to 3, and on 2, the shaking stopped. By 3, I unzipped the door to the tent and the 2 of us crawled out from it expecting to see someone standing out there, but they had already disappeared into the darkness, probably still watching us. We ran to the girls' tent yelling their names, saying we gotta go. They crawled out with their backpacks and followed us. We went back for our backpacks too after seeing them with theirs, even though our lives could have been in danger. After grabbing our bags and leaving the tents and sleeping bags, we somehow navigated down the mountain through the dark without flashlights on, relying only on moonlight. We had to stop and sit multiple times to rest, but we never stopped to sleep again. Not like we even had the option anymore. Plus, we were paranoid that we were being tailed. We had to just keep moving for hours until we made it back to the car. James drove us 20 minutes down the road before stopping, and then we slept in the car. We all woke up past noon because of how much walking we did and how late we finally got to fall asleep. We told the whole group about it the next day on the drive home. To our knowledge, nothing ever came up on the news about any kind of murders or weird happenings in the Adirondacks around that time. It was in October of 2017 if anyone wants to do some detective work of their own. This still holds up as the scariest and overall worst night of my life. My uncle is notorious in my family for being a daredevil and always worrying my mom, other uncles, and grandma, especially considering he's been on multiple medications for decades. He's what you'd call an adrenaline junkie, and he's climbed over 5 mountains in his life, most notably Everest. Well, he's attempted Everest, but he didn't make it to the top. Something in his living on edge personality and mentality slightly changed after he attempted to climb Everest. I was just 10 years old when he did, and even I remember the change. It wasn't until 5 years later that I was told just what happened on Everest. My uncle went alone on his expedition, which may have been his biggest mistake. He said he stayed at base camp for a full day before continuing his climb beyond that point. At first his climb was easy, he says, and as one would imagine, it got gradually more difficult. Even though it's a well-known fact that many bodies of previous climbers are still to be found on the mountain, my uncle says he never expected to actually find one. He entered the death zone, which is the area of the mountain where the high altitude results in a lack of available oxygen for humans to breathe. This is usually above 8,000 meters, and most of the 200+ climbers who've died on Everest have died in the death zone. People are advised to not stay in the death zone for more than 16 to 20 hours. While in this zone, my uncle saw his first dead body lodged in a ravine, and being the happy, uppity, bubbly person he is, it was a shock and truly disturbing to him. He described his mood change from, in his words, feeling alive and on top of the world, to in over his head and mortal. Nevertheless, he progressed onward, and when he was tired, he took a break and sat down. Seeing the corpse really messed with his head, and he mentioned that he was also starting to feel dizzy and lightheaded, likely due to the high altitude. My uncle didn't want to get up from his position. He felt like he was losing energy and began talking to himself. My uncle finally got up from his seated position after an hour and decided he didn't have it in him to make it up to the top. He started to make his way down, until another climber bumped into him and started telling him to come on, let's go, passing him and climbing further up the mountain where my uncle just came from. My uncle told the man he was not up for it and was going to make his way back down to base camp. He recounts that as the man spoke back to him, urging him to continue up the mountain, his voice was very echoey and surreal. My uncle said take care to the man and continue back down the way he came with his head spinning and feeling short of breath. As he continued his way down, every time he'd look up, the man would be behind him, smiling and making hand motions for my uncle to come back up. He thought smiling and ignoring it would be the best way to get him to leave him alone. After continuously looking back to that man following him, my uncle finally stopped and started firmly telling the man he wasn't feeling well and just wanted to get back to base camp. The man slightly above my uncle smiled once more and said, "Watch me go over the ledge." Then he walked to the edge of the snow and leaped down, disappearing under the edge. My uncle said that as he saw this, it snapped him out of his daze and he ran over to the edge to look down it. But there was nobody to be seen sliding down the edge of the mountain, no marks in the snow. He didn't even hear the sound of him sliding down the snow initially or anything. Witnessing this made my uncle hurry down the mountain even faster, until the next thing he remembered was darkness, then waking up at the base camp medical clinic in a bed. He had passed out, and a couple passerbys found him and carried him down low enough to where a rescue helicopter could reach him. My uncle waited until the end of the story to tell me that he was off his meds for the entire trip, and mixed with the lack of air in the death zone, he started to quickly hallucinate and talk to himself. Upon getting home, he did some research on recent deaths on the mountain, and learned of a young man who had died climbing Everest that same week who looked just like the man in the hallucination. This is when he started to question if it was actually a hallucination or not. However, the death was reported before my uncle had this alleged hallucination. He still says he's not entirely sure what he saw was a hallucination. I don't press him for more details about this story, as like I said, it's changed him and it's clearly left some kind of mental scar on him. I can't imagine how horrific of an experience this was for him. I once drove up to Banff National Park in Canada for a day of hiking and climbing. The park is home to numerous mountain climbing trails and is a scenic escape from the city for me to clear my head. I was going through a recent breakup and wanted to get out and get my mind off of it, and I thought this was the best way to do that. I had all my necessary tools in my climbing pack, including rope, a helmet, harness, quick draws, and whatever else I could fit in the bag. I hiked through half a mile of forest until I found a good rock wall I wanted to scale. So I found a strong enough tree to use as my anchor point and wrapped some rope around it. You may be asking why I started from the top instead of the bottom. Well, normally if I were on a known route, there would be eye bolts that are anchored into the rock that I could have just clipped my carabiner to, and when the carabiner is attached, then I'd clip my rope. As I climb up, I would place another carabiner or anchor and so on. But since I was making my own route on this day, I had to anchor at the top of the climb, which is called top roping, and rappel myself down to set each bolt. At the end of all this, I'll be at the bottom and able to climb up after setting my own route. After I was all set to go, I started to rappel down the face and set my bolts. To skip all the mountain climbing terminology and talk, as I rappelled down, I eventually came across a cave in the face. It was literally this big hole in the mountain wall, but it seemed unusual to me because usually a cave entrance is ground level. I was intrigued, so I climbed inside of it. I had plenty of rope to allow me to go inside. I was sitting at the edge of this opening, looking inside, and it got pitch black in there not too far from the entrance. I wondered how big this cave was, and if it led to a separate entrance on the other side of the mountain. But more importantly, I picked up on this buzzing sound from deeper in the cave. It was this very low note kind of buzzing, like you'd almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. I walked very slowly deeper into the cave, and as the humming got slightly louder, I said hello into the cave. Not because I was expecting an answer from anyone, nor did I want an answer. I wanted to see how much of an echo there would be, to give me an idea of how deep this cave went, and there was quite a loud echo. But on top of that, the humming or buzzing sound stopped after I said it. I was creeped out, no doubt, but I was still intrigued as to what that buzzing sound could have been. I stepped just a little more into the cave, the rope starting to wedge at the top of the cave entrance now. I started to hear this slow, deep breathing, and I suddenly knew I wasn't in the cave alone. Perhaps there was an animal in there. I started to back away slowly out of the cave. When I felt I was close enough to the entrance of the cave, I took out my flashlight from my backpack, aimed it into the cave, and my finger quivered over the button for a few seconds. In a moment of poor judgment but pure curiosity, I turned the flashlight on and the cave lit up a bit. At first I thought it was just an empty cave, until I noticed the two heads peering to me from behind the curved cave wall. I could only see half their faces, but they looked sickly and decrepit. The way they were watching me, they were in the dark seconds ago, impossible for me to see, but them able to see me perfectly standing by the light near the entrance of the cave. I turned off the flashlight and ran for it back out of the cave. I started to climb back up the face when I felt a grip around my ankle trying to pull me back into the cave. I kicked as hard as I could at my attacker, and I felt my shoe hit their face. In response, the sickly-looking person let go, and I heard him make this horrible shriek of pain. He sounded less human and more like some literal cave-dwelling monster. I didn't look down. I climbed the rock wall faster than I'd ever climbed. I don't think either of those two barely human things I saw in that cave attempted to come out and grab me. I made it back to the top in a surprisingly quick amount of time due to adrenaline. The reason I didn't just allow the rope to safely descend me down to the bottom instead of climbing to the top was because I feared they would grab the rope and pull me back up. I carved 2 big X's at the top of the face, and then 2 more at the bottom, indicating to whoever passes by here not to climb here. I hiked my way all the way back to the side of the road where I parked my car. I had a long drive home lost in my thoughts, appreciating my life and scared shitless, wondering what the hell was wrong with those people in that cave. Why were they in there, and what were they going to do to me? I'm telling you, they looked pale and sickly. They were not regular people. I called the park warden's number and gave them the coordinates of the cave and told them about the dangerous, sickly-looking people hiding in there. I'll tell you one thing though, this experience definitely took my mind off my breakup for a while. These are 3 honeymoon stories. Oftentimes, newlyweds take their honeymoons in foreign countries where the locals may not always speak their native tongue. In one of these stories, that exact scenario proved to be a problem, as a matter of fact. Learning a second or third language can prove to be a very useful skill that will come in handy many times in your life, and the app Babbel has now made learning a new language easier and more fun. All you need is 10 to 15 minutes a day, and within 3 weeks, you'll be quickly picking up a new language. Unlike other language apps and websites that may teach you robotic phrases that not even natives may use, Babbel thrives on preparing you for conversational language that you will be able to use in the real world. Also be sure to check out Babbel Live, where you can also take online classes in real time for a more personal approach. Right now, if you buy 6 months, Babbel is offering you an additional 6 months for free. Check the link in the description. For my wife and I's honeymoon, we went to Hawaii. Our hotel was on Maui, which we heard was the best island for couples and honeymoons. The hotel was on the beach, and every night they'd have torch shows, luau's, and other kinds of live entertainment. During the first few days, we did a lot of drinking and restaurant hopping. On our 4th day, we wanted to explore one of the jungle hiking trails, as there are a bunch on the island, and it was on our bucket list for the trip. We drove our rental car a long drive to the nearest parking lot to Pipiwai Trail, a long scenic trail in the bamboo forest in the jungle. The trail would eventually lead to numerous waterfalls and hidden ponds that you could swim in. We were told about it by some locals and other tourists, so that's what we wanted to do. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but the parking lot wasn't just for this one trail. Walking down the path for a while, it truly was just a wall of bamboo on either side of us. It was truly an environment I'd never seen before. My wife stopped us and pointed at a small animal slightly off the trail. It was a mongoose. It was stopped, looking at us, and we both thought it was adorable. My wife started approaching it slowly, bent down to appear smaller and less intimidating. I did the same. Of course, the little creature ran away pretty swiftly, and my wife chased after it goofily. I followed suit. As we got deeper into the jungle, straying away from the trail, we heard the sound of water. It was a waterfall nearby. We followed the sound of it until we came to this beautiful pond with a small waterfall pouring into it. We dipped our feet in the water, and it was a surprisingly comfortable temperature, and it was deep enough to submerge ourselves in. So we decided to do a little skinny dipping, knowing how unlikely it would be that anyone else would be here. Well, apparently we were wrong about that, because as we were in the water, my wife shrieked and said, "Oh my God," as she pointed at some older man in a straw hat with a long gray beard standing in the jungle, half behind a tree, staring at us. I'm too nice of a person, so I waved for some dumb reason, instead of yelling to stop creeping on us, because that's what it looked like he was doing. He didn't wave back, he didn't smile, he didn't even move. I looked at my wife and said we should leave, but she didn't want to step out of the water naked for him to see. I kind of agreed. So now I called out to him, asking if he needed something, and only then he called back in a surprisingly deep voice, saying he's looking for his dog. I said we haven't seen it, and then he walked away. I said to my wife we need to go immediately. We got out of the water and got dressed, then tried to find the trail, but we couldn't find it. We strayed far enough away from it that we were apparently lost. We had lost the direction we came from, and there was no cell reception out here. It was getting late in the day, and panic was setting in. By the time the sun was setting, my wife was in tears. All the while, as it got darker and darker, we felt as though we were being followed, hearing footsteps every now and then. It reached the point where the jungle was completely dark now, and we had to use our flashlights on our dying phones. But when we heard footsteps coming from behind us again, I whispered to my wife to turn it off to not reveal ourselves. We felt like we were being followed for hours. After turning out the lights, it was pitch black for a second, until my eyes started adjusting to the darkness. As soon as that happened, I noticed the figure about 10 feet away, and it was slowly creeping closer. I backed away slowly as I pushed my wife behind me. I said, "What do you want?" in a very nervous voice. My wife apparently didn't see him, because she turned her phone's flashlight back on and aimed it at the figure, revealing it to be that old man with a straw hat and beard holding a hacksaw. We both screamed. My wife let out a scream of fear while I screamed, "Go, go, go," to her. We ran through the jungle without any lights. There was just enough light to barely see where we were going. We ran and ran and ran, thankfully wearing sneakers and hiking attire. Eventually I got cell reception, so we followed the map back to the parking lot we came from, which took a good 10 to 15 minutes of running. We made it back to the car, and at that point, it felt like we were given a new chance at life. The next day we went straight to the Maui Police Department and reported the whole incident in an attempt to warn other tourists who may be visiting that specific trail. After that, we tried the best we could to continue our honeymoon, but it definitely put a damper on things. My honeymoon was in Sicily. Our hotels were in Palermo, Cefalù, and Messina in that order. While in Messina, we did most of the sightseeing at sites like Taormina. Messina was packed with beautiful old architecture and museums to explore, which is what my wife Patricia and I enjoy the most. Messina is a port-heavy city, and like the rest of Sicily, there are a lot of English-speaking tourists, but also a lot of Italian-speaking locals. We don't really speak any Italian beyond maybe an elementary level. We'd have a lot of locals approaching us trying to sell us things. At night, the vibe where we were was fun. Lots of music, people drinking and dancing and whatnot. We were partaking a little bit, while also continuing to walk around and explore. The night got the better of us, and we ended up getting pretty drunk, and the time flew by. Pretty soon it was past midnight, and things outside on the streets were simmering down. We took a wrong turn back to our hotel, and kind of lost our way. Eventually we ended up in this sketchy alleyway, and Patricia was getting upset that we seemed to be entering a sketchy area. I put my arm around her to make her feel safer. Suddenly some guy came up to us obnoxiously close, speaking Italian like a machine gun, so quick we couldn't even attempt to understand any words. We couldn't tell if he was angry or concerned, but he seemed frantic. He kept saying this word phantasma. At that moment, I didn't know what that word meant. I pushed the guy out of our faces and walked Patricia and I quickly out of the alleyway. He yelled more stuff at us in Italian. I didn't understand a single word of it. As we got away from him, I googled what the word phantasma meant, because it was the only word that he kept repeating that stood out. It means ghost, and when we found that out, we looked at each other. I couldn't help but nervously laugh to try to get Patricia to laugh as well, simply because it sounded ridiculous. We were in this dark, sketchy area of the city for sure. There didn't seem to be anyone else around. We'd normally call an Uber, but it's not even a thing in Sicily, so we had to walk it. I have to admit, I was probably as uncomfortable as Patricia, as we'd heard certain parts of the city were unsafe at night. There was this quiet woman's crying sound coming from behind us all of a sudden. We both heard it, and we both looked back. There was this young but freakishly tall woman about 10 yards away from us, walking slowly in our direction. Her face was buried in her hands. Her height was actually unnaturally tall. She looked taller than me. In fact, it was so creepy that even Patricia, who's usually a sweet, nurturing person, whispered that we should get the hell away from her. We jogged down this narrow street and turned left to another alleyway. And we turned back again to the crying sounds. That woman was now at the end of this alleyway, just behind us, but still walking at the same slow speed, her face still buried in her hands. It felt like we were in this channel of alleyways and narrow one-way streets, and every time we turned, we'd still hear the crying behind us. It only stopped when we made it back to, I guess, what you'd call one of the main roads with other civilian traffic besides us. From there, we simply walked back to the hotel. Patricia kept insisting what we saw was a ghost, and every time she said it, it gave me chills. This story doesn't do it any justice in explaining just how disturbing seeing that tall, lanky woman walking towards us in that alleyway was. Not to mention that guy say the word ghost in Italian over and over. I'm not ruling it out as some kind of crazy over-the-top joke. For all I know, we ended up on some Italian YouTube prank channel. But Patricia insists on believing it was actually a ghost we saw, and it still gives me chills thinking about that possibility. We aren't the richest couple out there. We both work 9-to-5 jobs to make ends meet. We're doing all right now, but back when we got married, we were struggling. So when it came time for our honeymoon, we couldn't go all out and blast all our money. My wife, who I'll choose to keep nameless, was doing research for affordable beach getaways, and she found a private house in the Bahamas for 3 nights on Airbnb, so we went with that. After flight tickets and the cost for the rental, it didn't even come out to that much. Upon arrival, we entered the code for the padlock on the door to let ourselves into the home. It had a spacious living room and kitchen, a large bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a big back deck that led to the private beach. We spent all of the first day on the beach, then walked to a nearby restaurant for dinner. When we got back, this is where the weird things started happening. As soon as we walked in the door, we noticed things seemed like they were in the wrong places, like our sandals, our bags, and so on. Nothing was missing though, so we accused each other of having moved the stuff beforehand. We jumped in the hot tub that was on the back deck for a while, until we both heard something from inside the house, like a bang or a door closing. I got out from the hot tub to check, dripping all over the floor of the house. All the doors were closed though. I didn't remember if they were open earlier or not. Regardless, I checked the room and it was clear of any intruders, as well as the bathroom. I went back outside to grab a towel and put my clothes on. I was done in the hot tub anyway, and so was my wife, though I was growing a little suspicious, or cautious you might say. The second day we sat on the beach for a while again, then went to some of the touristy areas of the Bahamas and did dinner. When we got back, again, we felt like things were different. Our stuff seemed to be in the same spots, but the bathroom and bedroom doors were open, and we didn't remember keeping them open. We knew it was possible we were being paranoid now and didn't actually remember how the doors were left. But still, it was getting uncomfortable now. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked, and we skipped the hot tub that night. We just watched movies on the TV in the living room, as there was a bunch of included streaming services on there. There was no upstairs to the house, yet we thought we could hear little taps and whatnot above our heads. Maybe the roof? Maybe an iguana or some similar creature? At this point, we were even starting to think there might be some kind of Bahamian creepy crawly in the house. It seemed like a more logical explanation as to there being an intruder in this relatively small space. That night, I was in bed before my wife. She was in the shower when I heard her scream. I basically exploded out of bed to run into the bathroom. She turned the water off by then and told me that there was something in the vent above the shower. I got on the ledge of the tub and looked in it, but it was too dark in there. However, I did hear some tiny noises coming from in there. This almost confirmed that there was a rodent or some small creature in the vents of the house. Still, we had one more day, it wasn't our problem. We went to bed together. The next thing I remember was waking up to my wife shaking me. She had this horrified look on her face that immediately sent shivers down my spine. She told me to listen, and the silence of the room allowed me to hear it. This frantic whispering sound coming from the ceiling, particularly one of the ceiling vents. That was it. I grabbed my phone to call the owner of the Airbnb. I heard the ringing, but simultaneously I heard this vibrating sound from above us. Immediately I started to think, wait, is there an upstairs that the owner is living in? The vibrating above us stopped almost as quickly as it started, but the call was still ringing on my end. Curiously, I took my phone's flashlight and aimed it up through the vents, and for just a split second, I saw someone looking down through the vent into the room. Most notably, I saw their eyes. We packed all of our important stuff as quickly as we could. It took all of about 30 seconds and we were out the front door. We ran through the sandy dirt road until we came to a street, then we stopped to catch our breaths. We stayed in a cheap hotel that night and the next night as well. The last day we spent most of it waiting at the airport, but we reported this incident to Airbnb and we got all of our money back, and I'm pretty sure Airbnb banned the owner of that house's account. We didn't pursue anything further with legal action, as we were just happy to get our money back. Nothing of ours was missing, but who the hell knows what kind of shady shit he was doing there when we weren't in the house. My family and I are probably the biggest skeptics in the world, which is why I can't explain what happened that day. I went downstairs and my brother was in the kitchen. I grabbed a water and asked him if he believed in ghosts. He shook his head, but told me a story about something that he thinks may seem paranormal. Then I looked at him and asked, "Did you ever try to scare me when I came home from school?" I planned on asking that question to follow with my story. "Once," he said. Somehow that calmed me down, and I wasn't going to bring anything else up because I thought it was some kind of closure. He continued by saying, "But all I did was shoot a Nerf gun bullet at you while you were on the computer." I wish he didn't say that. That wasn't what happened to me in the 7th grade. I do remember him shooting a Nerf gun at me, but it felt inferior to what I was about to tell him. I continued to speak with him about the story that follows. It happened in middle school when I was in 7th grade and recently started off the new year. I came home that day and went to my bedroom where I sat in my bed and put in earbuds to watch YouTube videos. My mom had called me to tell me that my brother would be gone or would be leaving soon to go to a friend's house. My parents also worked late, which means I would be home alone. I was a very quiet kid when no one was around because I always had this fear that there could be someone in the house with me. If I didn't make much noise, then they couldn't find me, right? Who knew that suspicion could have possibly been true? I paused my YouTube video and headed to the bathroom. My house has a very weird layout. I'll try to explain what the important parts of this story looked like. If you were in my bathroom facing the door, you could step out and take a left, and my brother's room would be to your right at the end of the hallway, which is a short hallway. If you went right, you would reach the stairway that went down and stopped because there was a platform in the middle, and then you would walk in the same direction you came to get lower. The stairway leads to our main entrance of the house. We also have an alarm activated. If any doors or windows are opened, a box will immediately say which door has been used. I was in the bathroom and right about to flush the toilet when I heard a loud thud come from my brother's room. I assumed that he must be about to leave for his friend's house, so I flushed the toilet and got up to wash my hands. There were no more noises. The house felt still, but I felt like I was being listened to. I turned off the sink and walked over to the bathroom door to lock it. Something felt wrong. My stomach started to ache from fear. I felt like I was just being paranoid, but I also couldn't shake that weird feeling in my gut. So I waited for another noise. I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't text my brother. We had a house phone in there, but it made loud noises when you dialed, so I didn't want to risk it. Then I heard talking, which was definitely coming from my brother's room, but that was not my brother talking, and it couldn't have been my dad. The muttering was deep and low. It sent shivers down my spine. I could tell it was a voice because of the distinction of an S or a T, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. Then there was a slow pounding noise that started getting closer to me. It came out of my brother's room and nailed its way towards the bathroom door. It stopped dead in its tracks right at the door. I threw myself away from the door near the window, hoping that if it busted in, I could get away to leave. I couldn't fight whoever it was since I was a weak 7th grader, so that was out of the question. I covered my mouth to keep from breathing loudly in case they didn't know I was in the bathroom. Then they continued to walk. I could hear them making their way to the stairway, and then it stopped. I heard a loud crashing noise from what I thought was the middle platform of the stairs, and then again at the bottom. Then the muttering stopped, and the loud pounding made its way to the door. I heard the door open and close, and I heard the alarm go off for the door as well. I didn't know if it was safe or not, so I made my way to the door and rested my hand on the doorknob, still covering my mouth. To the left of me towards the ground is a laundry chute that led to our laundry room. If someone were to get from the main floor to the laundry room, it would definitely take over 30 seconds. But about 10 seconds after the door opened and closed, a vicious jabbing noise pounded at the small laundry chute door. I stood there in awe, not sure what to do. It sounded like someone took the end of a broom and reached up there to stab at the door. I watched as the pounding of the door vibrated the small laundry chute door, hoping that it wouldn't bust open. Then it ended. I waited in the bathroom for what seemed like an eternity, and then quietly crept to my room to call my parents. No one picked up, so I waited for them to get home and held my door handle to make sure no one could get in since I didn't have a lock on it. When my parents got home, they didn't believe me. Soon after, my brother arrived, and he doubted me as well. Telling this again to my brother made his mouth drop. He continued to tell me that he used to hear things come from the attic that used to open up in his bedroom. I will honestly never forget that day. Me and my brother can't figure out who or what that was, and I try not to think too hard about it either. I still don't quite know what happened, and I may never know, but I want to. My name's Alyssa. I was 16 years old at the time, living with my mom in a crappy Bronx, New York apartment. Living in the Bronx was definitely an experience, not a good one. Always sketchy characters around, usually scary to walk alone at night, small apartment, and creepy neighbors. I don't mean that as an understatement. Our apartment was the second to last one in a hall on the 7th floor, and our neighbor, the owner of the last apartment in the hall, seemed to always be sitting outside his door, sitting on the windowsill. He would always make a point of looking at me when I entered the apartment, even when I would be with my mom. My mom told me to stay away from that man. We never even knew his name. He was a black man in his 60s, very little hair left, but his remaining hair was gray. He always had the same emotionless expression on his face when he looked at me, and then one day it started. Every time I would see him in the hall, he would say hi to me, but he'd call me by my name to make it even creepier. I wasn't exactly sure how he got my name, but I never asked. There was one night that my mom was working the night shift, so I'd be home alone all night. I came home at like 9 p.m., and the neighbor was as usual sitting on that windowsill as if he didn't have anything going on in his life. As I unlocked the door, this time instead of saying hi to me, he asked me if my mom was working tonight. Here's where I look back and cringe because of my own stupidity, because I foolishly nodded yes. He didn't say anything after that. He just slowly nodded his head. I didn't say anything else either. I simply walked inside and shut the door. I had enough of his creepy ass for one night. Basically, after getting home, I just washed up a little bit. I had a snack, did laundry, and took a shower. As I was in the shower, I heard a weird rumbling noise. It was a pretty concerning noise, but I couldn't even begin to try and pin out what it could have been. I got out of the shower after hearing it because I was concerned someone might have been in the apartment. I heard a similar noise outside of the bathroom. It seemed to come from my bedroom. I threw on the clothes I had in the bathroom and searched my entire room. I couldn't find a person, but while searching my room, I saw an ever so tiny hole in the wall. I got closer to feel it and look at it. Then I got down on my knees to look through it, and when I saw what was on the other side, I fell backwards because of how scared I was of what I saw. It was someone's eye. Someone was actually looking through that hole from the other side. Then I realized this wall separated our apartment from the creepy neighbor's apartment. Then I had a sudden realization of what that sound I heard in the bathroom must have been. I ran back to the shower and felt all around the wall until I found another hole, identical in size from the one in my room. The neighbor drilled these two holes, maybe even more, to spy on me. I called my mom and told her, and as I was on the phone with her, there were knocks on the apartment door. It was the neighbor, and he kept yelling, "Open the door right now. I didn't drill those holes." My mom freaked out and told me to call the cops, and she'd try to get home ASAP. One good thing about the Bronx, police response time is fast, and there were cops at my apartment door in under 5 minutes. My mom was home half an hour later. My mom pressed charges for stalking, invasion of privacy, and criminal mischief. The apartment building also evicted the man and patched up the holes at the man's expense. I'll never forget the time my friend Hal and I went camping. Hal is an Eagle Scout and nature lover, so he's always going out on these camping trips. One time I decided to come along and see what it was about. He went with his at-the-time girlfriend Maya. I received a last-minute invitation. We carpooled together and arrived to the destination 3 hours later. Hal doesn't believe in going to campsites because it doesn't give the real camping experience when you're surrounded by other people, so he took us to some random dirt trail off some dead road that he seemed to know about. He drove down this dirt road in the woods for a couple minutes until he seemed to be content with where we were. Then he put the car in park. It was such an inconspicuous place to stop that I wasn't even aware at first that we were getting out there. Hal unloaded the trunk. Most of the stuff we brought consisted of tents, sleeping bags, food, toilet paper, and first aid equipment. Hal said he usually packed a lot lighter, but was making this an easy trip for Maya and I, whatever that meant. Once we found a good place to set up camp, Hal basically assigned us tasks. Setting up a tent was one thing I knew how to do, so Hal told me to set up the 2 tents. Maya stayed behind with me and kind of helped with the tents, while also unpacking some of the supplies. Hal went off to find dry firewood. He would come back every so often with a couple pieces of wood. Nightfall came quicker than expected. Thankfully, Hal had collected enough wood by then to start a nice fire, and the tents were pitched. We sat by the fire, drinking and reminiscing about old memories, most of which Maya was not in the picture for. I imagine she got tired of hearing our drunken, nonsensical stories because she went to her tent before Hal and I. So, Hal and I stayed up for a little while longer, now being a bit quieter and keeping the laughter to a minimum as a courtesy to Maya. I finished my last beer, and I was definitely feeling it by then. We chatted for a bit more, until Hal told me to shh and listened. I heard it too. There was walking out in the distance, beyond the area at which the fire lit up. Hal assured me it was likely a deer. When I naively asked, "What if it's a bear?" he reassured me that a bear would not come this close to a campfire or the sound of people. I asked him if he was sure about that. He didn't answer, though. The footsteps seemed to be going in circles, getting ever so slightly louder with each passing minute. When the footsteps got close enough, we started to hear a disturbing noise. It was like a clicking, growling type of noise. "Is that a wolf?" I whispered. Hal didn't answer. He just motioned for me to get into the tent. I did what he said. I got into the tent that I pitched for myself, and I believe Hal got into the tent that I pitched for he and Maya. The clicking noise outside was getting more and more clear, and it increasingly became obvious it was not the sound of a wolf, or a bear, or any kind of animal I could imagine. It didn't even sound like something of this planet. The light from the fire outside cast an eerie glow onto the walls of the tent, and I had to cover my mouth so that I wouldn't scream when I saw the shadow on the tent walls of some horrific, huge, bipedal thing walking past my tent. The footsteps were so slow, but so heavy. It moved away from my tent towards the direction of Hal and Maya's tent. The next thing I remember, besides waiting in absolute horror, was Maya's scream. She screamed as if something were about to kill her. I didn't know what was happening, but I heard Hal screaming outside, "Run," over and over. I heard the two of them hurrying away outside, so I rushed outside and followed. We ran in the pitch black, no flashlights, nothing, and yet we still knew we were being chased by something. Footsteps followed close behind me since I was in the back. By some miracle, Hal managed to lead us right to the car, and without looking back, we all got into our respective seats, and Hal floored it down the trail. Hal drove down the dirt trail for about half a minute before we came to a dead end. He had to somehow turn this pickup truck around now, in this dark forest, not too far from where we were being chased. I urged him to turn off the lights so that whatever was chasing us wouldn't see us. He insisted he needed the lights on though so that he wouldn't hit any trees trying to turn the truck around. He shifted from drive to reverse, over and over. Meanwhile, I sat in the back seat biting my nails and clenching my teeth, looking around the woods outside, terrified that I might see that thing from our campsite. At long last, Hal got the truck completely turned around, and he once again stepped on it to get us out of that forest. We left everything at that campsite, at least $100 worth of equipment, but there was zero chance of us ever going back there. What caused Maya to scream was heavy breathing and something pushing into their tent, trying to rip it open. Hal still says he's never heard or seen anything like that in his life. He still has no idea what it could have been, but it definitely walked on two legs. How do we know it wasn't a person, you might ask? Simply because of its size and the noises it made. I think everyone has one truly horrific, unexplainable experience in their lives, and this was ours.
I am 14 and my friend is 15. One night my friend asked me if I wanted to spend the night, so I did. His mom was at work and his dad was at the gym. Me and my friend were upstairs in his room playing video games. We kept hearing what sounded like scratching noises and slight banging. We thought nothing of it because he has a dog, so we kept playing our video game. Minutes later we heard the noises again, but they were louder, and so we went to go see if it was the dog. It couldn't be the dog because it was lying outside his parents' room. Fearing someone was trying to break in, we grabbed our knives and flashlights. We searched all the rooms upstairs, then went downstairs, searching it with only our flashlights. We decided it would be best to search his backyard, although we don't know how someone would get in his backyard because it's fenced in and there's a deep drop-off on the other side of the fence at the back. The search came up empty. I convinced my friend we should search the front of his house and make our way around his fence. We went around front and he went left and I went right. On the right his fence connects to his neighbor's, so I went over to him to find him frozen with his light shined in the direction of the woods near the drop-off. I was weirded out and shined my light in the direction of his to find a guy dressed from head to toe in all black, frozen and staring at us. At this moment, I yelled run and we bolted inside the house and called 911. We waited and minutes later 2 officers arrived to find nothing and they told us to call them again if anything happens. Me and my friend were instructed by his parents to stay inside and downstairs in case anything happens, so we did. About an hour later, me and him were sitting downstairs on the couch and he out of nowhere asked, "Did you see that?" "See what?" He then said, "The light. Someone shined a light through the window over the fence." About a second after he said that, I saw a beam of light shine through the window. So we called 911 once again, and the officers showed up minutes later and yet again found nothing. Me and my friend at this point were paranoid and waited until his dad showed up and we took him outside to the backyard where we all heard footsteps. His dad convinced us that it was just a hunter, so we went to bed with no more problems. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. My friend asked me about 2 weeks later if I wanted to spend the night again, and I did. Later that night, his parents were both still at work. We were joking around about what had happened with what we thought was the hunter as his dog was outside doing its business. While we were talking, I peeked out the back door to check on his dog to find what looked to be someone peeking over the fence, so we immediately called his dog in and locked the door. We left it alone, and minutes later, as we were in his room, we heard noises, so I looked out his window to once again see what looked like a guy peeking over the fence. So we grabbed knives and flashlights once again and went in the backyard and shined the flashlight in the direction we thought we saw the person. The light illuminated the outline of a head at the area of the fence we thought we saw the guy. We ran inside and called 911 and they responded. Minutes later they showed up and again found nothing and sat at the area outside the fence near the woods for 5 minutes in case something happened. Nothing happened, so they left and they told us to call back if anything happened. We didn't tell his parents this time because we thought they wouldn't believe us. Me and my friend returned upstairs to his room, and about 2 hours later, we heard the loudest banging ever. It started from the downstairs on the left side and went to the front door. We freaked out, we grabbed the dog and barricaded ourselves in his parents' room and got his dad's gun out in case we needed it. We then called 911, and again the police showed up and found no one and no sign of anyone and left. That was the last time we ever had that problem, and it still has us scared to this day. I was 14 years old, hanging out with my friend Jesse, who was also 14. We were in the living room playing Call of Duty. His parents weren't home for the night, so we were being as loud as we wanted. We were doing nothing but playing video games and eating junk food all night. And eventually, since his parents weren't home, he convinced me to just stay over for the night. So after Jesse went upstairs to go to the bathroom, I went downstairs to call my mom in private and tell her I would be staying over. By the time I got back upstairs, Jesse was back, and he just stared at me with a confused look on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he thought that I was upstairs as he thought he heard someone in the bedroom next to the bathroom. I assured him I was downstairs making a phone call, and he just looked back upstairs with a concerned look. He walked upstairs and I followed him. He stopped at the door to the bedroom and put his ear up against it. He then opened the door and peeked into the room. It was dark, but I could see there was enough light in there to be able to scan the room. We didn't see anything, so he shut the door. I told him he was being paranoid as we went back downstairs to play more video games. We turned the volume back up loud and resumed playing. After the match ended, the loading screen came up, along with the silence that usually accompanies loading screens. That's when me and Jesse both looked at each other. Jesse hit the mute button as we listened to what we were sure was somebody grunting from upstairs in that bedroom. But soon after the silence from the television, there was silence from upstairs as well. Jesse whispered to me that someone is hiding up there. They must have stopped making the noise as soon as there was silence down here. Jesse whispered to me that we need to leave through the back door right now as it was much quieter than the front door. I agreed, and we headed outside to the back door. As soon as we were outside, Jesse got on the phone with the police as I looked up to the bedroom window. For some stupid reason, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and aimed it up to the window. About 3 seconds later, my heart dropped as someone stepped into view from behind the glass, but only for a brief moment. They seemed to crouch down under the window after spotting us. Jesse saw it too. That's when we actually took off down the block. We only came back when we saw a police car parked outside with its lights on. Jesse unlocked the front door for the 2 cops and they went inside to investigate. As me and Jesse were outside waiting by the car, we saw him. Him, as in the guy who was surely at the window. He was coming out from the backyard, walking really fast, yet also clearly trying to keep quiet. This man was really tall, like 6'5" or something, and he looked to be mid-40s. Me and Jesse ran inside and screamed for the cops to come outside, but by that time he was gone, and we had no idea which direction he could have gone in. Inside of the bedroom that the man was in, a giant clothes bag had been pulled out from under the bed with certain articles of clothing obviously missing. There was also money missing from the desk drawer, and the desktop computer had been turned on. We never saw or heard of this man again. This took place in the summer of 2008 when I was 12 years old. I was sleeping over at my friend Calvin's house. I can't remember every little detail about what was going on, but I remember Calvin's family came home unexpectedly early, and things were getting a bit hectic in the house, so we came up with this cute little idea of pitching a tent up in the backyard and sleeping out there for fun. We figured why not since it was warm out anyway. We pitched the tent in like 15 minutes with Calvin's backyard nightlight giving us enough light in the dark. Now on one side of Calvin's backyard beyond the fence was about 100 yards of nothing but trees. We lived in the country in New Jersey. Anyway, after goofing around for a while, Calvin turned off the nightlight and we finally went to sleep. Now I don't know about everyone else, but I cannot for the life of me fall asleep in sleeping bags or let alone anything but my bed. I was twisting and turning for like 3 hours trying to fall asleep in that thing. Sometime during the night, I started to hear a little rattly, creaky type sound coming from around the fence. It gave me chills at first, naturally. I wanted to wake Calvin up, but I didn't. It sounded like the wooden fence was being pushed or was just moving. It was a bit windy out after all, but still, nevertheless, being the only one awake outside in a pretty rural area and hearing a weird sound would make anyone uneasy. I tried to ignore it for the longest time, rolling around for like 3 hours hearing nothing but the sound of the wind, to then hearing a constant strange sound was just too weird, and I was getting downright freaked out. I felt the urge to pee coming on, and I didn't really want to go out there without knowing Calvin was awake. So I woke him up and told him to listen to that noise. Of course he thought it was just the wind, but as long as he was awake, I did feel better about leaving the tent. I unzipped the tent and naturally looked in the direction of the noise. I couldn't really see anything, it was too dark, so I walked over and flicked on the nightlight switch. When I looked at the fence, I saw there was a person leaning on the fence with his head down, seemingly pushing the fence. I immediately turned the light off and practically dove into the tent. I whispered to Calvin what I saw, and as we both fell silent, we realized that the noise had stopped. I told Calvin to call his house phone as quietly as possible, but he said we should run straight for the back door. I agreed. He unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and opened the little door, and when he ran out of the tent, he screamed. In reaction, I jumped out from the tent and ran straight for the back door as well, not looking behind me. When I asked Calvin why he screamed like that, his response scared me. He told me he saw somebody standing right by the side of the tent in arm's reach. The rest of the night we slept in Calvin's room upstairs, and I could swear, with the window open, I could still hear the creaky fence being pushed, but every time I looked, I couldn't see anyone out there.
This first photo that you're about to see in a few moments was taken by a viewer named Jane. Jane had met a man named Jeremy off a dating app. She hadn't been on any dating apps since her at the time recent breakup, and she thought it was finally fun to get back into the dating scene. After swiping away on some dating app and conversing with a few people, she matched Jeremy, who seemed to be the kind of guy she would feel comfortable with and connect with. Jane describes herself as a good-looking but shy and reserved girl, and she described Jeremy as an above-average looking guy with a buzz cut who was exactly her type. He had a full tattoo sleeve on his left arm and had mostly pictures of himself outdoors. Most notably, his first picture was of him leaning on his pickup truck with his dog in the bed of the truck and the woods in the background. The two struck up a conversation about his dog and then dogs in general, and eventually the conversation segued to local bars that the two would frequent. Jeremy picked up Jane, and the two ended up going to a bar called Lansdowne Street, and in her words, kind of hitting it off. Jeremy dropped off Jane at home, but beforehand he seemed a bit reluctant, wanting their little date to continue, even at one point implying that she should go back to his place with him. She politely rejected him, and that was the end of their first date. The two would text back and forth the next few days, and saw each other again the following Friday, where they went out to get fast food and ice cream. After chatting in Jeremy's car driving around for a bit, he ended up taking them to his house, where he started trying to get her to come into his house. She rejected this request over and over until it got creepy, and then he started getting a bit physical. Jane said she didn't know if he was trying to physically remove her from the car or if it was him trying to make some kind of physical advance on her. Either way, she shoved his arms off of her and left the car, walking quickly down the street. Jeremy called her a few times, but she ignored him and kept walking. She had her older brother Chris come pick her up. Shockingly, after a long back and forth over text, Jeremy cursed Jane out, but then minutes later switched his tone to apologetic and regretful. Jane blocked his number, figuring he was not what he initially seemed and he might be crazy. Now this is when the photo that I mentioned earlier comes into play. That night, Jane was awoken to a sound outside her window. It was the sound of the recycling bin full of glass and cans on the side of the house being kicked. It was late at night, so this was cause for alarm. She got out of the bed to look out her bedroom window. Upon lifting up the blind and looking around outside for just a second, she saw something that made her stomach churn. In this picture that she took, you see Jeremy standing in the darkness with his hood over his head, facing the window. She managed to not scream and be brave enough to take this picture when she saw him out there. Jeremy tried opening the window when he was seen and started yelling Jane's name repeatedly. Jane screamed for her brothers and her dad to help, and by this point Jeremy had taken off. According to Jane, the whole block had to hear his 8-cylinder pickup truck flooring it down the street. Tempted to text Jeremy threats of calling the police, she showed restraint and brought the info to the police the next day and filed for a restraining order using the texts and pictures as proof of reason. She sent a photo of the restraining order to Jeremy, which went unresponded to because she never unblocked him. What Jeremy planned to do at Jane's window is not exactly clear, but even if it wasn't to break in and he wanted to talk to her, that wouldn't be okay either. And after the toxic messages he sent her, nobody would assume he's a completely level-headed individual. In fact, those messages, mixed with his sneaking around her house in late hours of the night and coming to her window after being blocked, suggest he might have been a dangerous individual.
What you're looking at right now is one of the many dolls made by Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian former journalist and college professor with expert knowledge of cemeteries. As a child, Anatoly began wandering through cemeteries with friends for fun, and as time went on, he developed a fascination for the dead. Decades later, this fascination led to a hobby of collecting dolls. But this hobby hid a macabre obsession that drew upon his particular interests, digging up the dead and making dolls out of their corpses. Yes, the doll you're looking at is actually made out of a dead body. After making his human dolls, he kept them in his home as his companions and possibly lovers, evident by some of the stuff he wrote about his dolls. For example, "I kissed her once, then again, then again." But the really disturbing part of this is that the dolls were in majority made from little girls aged 3 to 12, and he would apply lipstick and makeup to many of their faces. He even marked the birthday of each of his dead victims in his bedroom. His self-proclaimed expertise on cemeteries wasn't a lie, as he was able to desecrate countless graves in his hometown while evading police for years until he was finally caught after the increasing suspicion at the growing number of defiled graves in the area. When police searched his home, they found 26 life-size dolls, or rather mummified corpses, scattered throughout the house. But the police didn't know they were corpses at first, until he openly admitted to it. His parents, who lived in the same flat as him, claimed to know nothing of his activities. His parents and others who had seen the dolls stated that they did not suspect that there were dead bodies inside, but then again, who would? Not even the police suspected the dolls to be bodies at first. His parents said they thought it was just his hobby to make such big dolls and did not see anything wrong with it. During a hearing in which he sought to be released from a psychiatric hospital to care for his elderly mother and live with a new girlfriend, he refused to apologize to his victim's parents. In his mind, he thought he was doing something good, as he stated he felt great sympathy for the dead children and thought that they could be brought back to life by either science or black magic. He even went as far as to shun the parents for leaving their daughters in the cold, whereas he took them into the warmth to be reborn. Anatoly dried the corpses using a combination of salt and baking soda, and then stored the bodies in secure, dry places in and around cemeteries. Once the bodies dried, he carried them to his home, where he used various methods to make the dolls, in an attempt to give the children functional bodies to be used when he eventually discovered a way to bring them back to life, feeling that their physical remains were too decayed and ugly for them to feel comfortable or happy. While some of the parents want Anatoly locked away behind bars for life, it was determined that he suffered a form of paranoid schizophrenia and has since been held in a psychiatric hospital. From his perspective, he may have thought he was saving a bunch of young girls, but from any other perspective, it was a horrific, downright disturbing thing to do. The picture you're looking at right now is of Amy Reeves and her baby sister. The backstory behind this picture isn't as cute and wholesome as one would imagine. On this day, Amy was taking her sister out trick-or-treating for Halloween. Amy lives in the backwoods of Texas. She moved from Houston to a small town closer to Galveston, as she described to be about an hour drive towards the southeast coast. Amy's move from the big city to a very small town was much needed for her,
as she was sick of the city life, and settling into a very small home with 2 acres was a nice change of scenery for her. However, she kept noticing something completely eerie from the moment she moved into the house. It had nothing to do with the property or the home, but rather something outside the home. She kept noticing every time she would pull out of her driveway, a car would follow her and go the exact route she was going. She would ignore it and move on with her day at first, but it kept happening every single time that she would leave her house. In one of the neighboring houses, the same vehicle would pull out of their driveway whenever she would pull out of hers. She very soon started to suspect that there were some ill intentions there. However, for a while, she kept ignoring it and still moved on with her day, hoping it would stop eventually. When she was returning home from work one day, something in her gut told her to take a different route home, so she listened to her gut and took a different route. Instead of taking the highway, she took the service road towards the entrance of her little neighborhood. Instead of driving straight through the neighborhood to take a left, she took a slightly sharp right at the entrance and took a 3-minute longer route back home. But even on this detour, she eventually spotted the same vehicle in a rearview mirror. As she started to speed away to try to escape the car, it started flashing her aggressively. Eventually she makes a left turn and the car doesn't seem to follow. She proceeded home, and just as she thought she was safe and the stalker wasn't around, she realized she was wrong. The stalker's car with the brights still on was approaching, the lights becoming brighter as it got closer. By now it was clear the stalker had been following her home, even down her new route. The man pulled into his driveway and just sat there while Amy went into the house. While inside, she looked through the window out at the car, and the man must have taken notice because he started revving his engine. By this point, it was clearly a full-fledged stalker harassment situation, so Amy called the police in hopes to have them go and talk to him for her. When police arrived, she explained the whole situation the best she could, noting multiple times that she just moved in and she doesn't know the man. The police went over to the man's house to talk with him. Meanwhile, Amy went to her restroom, but she was yet to be under the realization that she had left the back door unlocked when she went outside to smoke a cigarette not too long ago. While she was in the bathroom, she heard footsteps walking towards her bedroom. She got up to shut and lock the bathroom door instantly, exposing where she was to the intruder. And seconds later, there was a knock on the wall separating the bathroom and her bedroom. Even though it was fairly obvious her cover was already blown, she remained as quiet as she could. The thought that maybe it could have been one of the police officers came up in Amy's head, but after one look out the bathroom window, that idea was out the window. Outside, she could see a police officer struggling with what appeared to be damp wood from the half-rotted shed beside the stalker's house. Amy pulled up her pants, getting ready to run to the front door. And that's when she heard it again, an aggressive knock on the other side of the wall from her bedroom. The stalker was inside her bedroom, no doubt. With not many other options other than being a sitting duck, Amy opened the bathroom door and bolted for the front door and outside to try and find an officer. But there were none in sight, not even the one that was struggling with the rotted wood moments earlier, just their empty squad car. After running around looking for the officers, she returned closer to her house where there was a commotion heard from inside, and it sounded as though there was a struggle between an officer and somebody else. Amy re-entered her house to see one of the officers on her bedroom floor in a lot of pain, who looked to be struggling holding his neck, not bleeding, but bruising as if the man punched him in the throat repeatedly or strangled him. The officer never told Amy exactly what happened because his partner called an ambulance for him, but Amy was notified later that same day that the man who was stalking her was taken into custody for assaulting and fleeing from an officer. Amy never learned why the cop's partner was struggling with the wood outside, or how exactly the one officer knew to check the inside of her house. In all likelihood, by the time the police had arrived, the stalker had already let himself into her house. And when the police didn't get an answer at the stalker's house, one of them returned to Amy's house to find the door ajar, and the rest you could figure out. The picture you saw minutes earlier of Amy and her baby sister was sent to her phone only days after moving in, and it was taken by a passing car without her even knowing it. After this entire stalker incident, it became much clearer who took the picture, though Amy still doesn't know how exactly they could have gotten her phone number.
This happened back at a magical, delicate age when I still believed in Santa Claus. It was Christmas Eve night, or technically Christmas at that point. The time, I have no idea. All I know is it was late and everyone in my house was probably asleep. I woke up randomly to what I don't know, but I was probably extremely thirsty. I had to get out of my bed and walk all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. There were night lights on in the living room and kitchen, so I didn't have to turn on any lights to see where I was going. Whenever I was thirsty when I was a little kid, I'd always decide to finish the glass in the kitchen instead of bring it up to my room. I don't know why, just one of those stupid things I did as a kid. As I was sipping the water, I heard noises come from down in the den, where we had our Christmas tree. It sounded like a big bag. I peered my head around the wall leading down the stairway to the den, but it was a little too dark to see who could be down there. I actually thought maybe it was my mom, so I started walking down the stairs, and the rustling of the bag stopped. I turned down the couch side lamp, and there I was, greeted with a massive man, both in height and size, wearing a red suit and hat and a familiar long white beard. It was Santa Claus. He waved me over, and I nervously but excitedly walked over to him. He patted my head and said he was just delivering my presents from his black bag. I looked at the bag, which seemed to be full of small boxes. I tried to get a peek in the bag, but he stopped me and said, No, don't do that. It's a surprise." I noticed there were already some presents under the tree. He turned me around and whispered in my ear I need to go back to bed. For some reason I didn't go. I just turned around and kept looking at Santa. Eventually he actually started walking me up the stairs, telling me we need to be quiet. He asked me which way my room was, and then he told me to go up the second flight of stairs. That was when I actually obeyed him. I looked down the stairs when I was at the top, and all I saw was the eerie figure of the Santa Claus looking up at me. I realized he turned off the nightlight as I was walking up the stairs. I went to my room and shut the door, excited that I just saw Santa. As I tried to fall back asleep, I heard a loud bang from downstairs in the den. The sound traveled all the way back up to my room. I assumed that was Santa leaving the house. The next morning, I woke up early to my mom's screams downstairs. I ran down to the den, where my mom and dad already were, to a disturbing and confusing scene for my young self. There were no presents under the tree, and the sliding window was broken. I don't mean the glass was shattered, I mean it was slammed shut so hard it got knocked off the sliding mechanism. I confusedly asked my parents what happened, and explained that I saw Santa last night. When I told them this, they frantically tried getting as much info out of me as possible. My dad called the police, and when I asked him about the story for fresh details before writing this, he said the 911 operator said on the line that 2 other calls for the same incident had come in that morning. Apparently a man dressed as Santa Claus was targeting certain houses with accessible windows, and he was stealing the gifts under their Christmas trees. I believe there's a special place in hell for that man. My parents had to tell me later that day that Santa isn't real, and that should anything like that ever happen again, not to trust it. I once worked as a night security guard for a brief, horrible part of my life. It was for many places, but for the longest time, a mall in Chicago, which I'll leave the name out so that the story can in no way get traced back to me. As the lone night security guard in a huge city mall, it was very relaxing and laid back. But of course, working graveyard hours was the worst, especially when I had to do it on Christmas Eve night. I did my regular pacing back and forth the wide halls of the mall, occasionally having a seat by the big center Christmas tree which would stay lit 24/7. After getting a coffee from the security lounge section, I stepped back into the hall and noticed all the way on the other side of the mall, a light was on in one of the stores. A light that wasn't on before, I swear it. No one was supposed to be in the mall besides me. I jogged over to the store and set my coffee down under a plant. It was a jewelry shop. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. So how could anyone be in there? The light in the store suddenly started flickering, so naturally I had to chalk it up as faulty wiring, false alarm. I knelt down to pick up my coffee again, and as I looked up, I saw someone's head behind the front counter of the store. Just their head, like they were hiding. But it happened so fast. One moment there was light, the next darkness, and when the light flicked back on again, the head was gone. I literally rubbed my eyes and shook my head, wondering was I seeing things. I took my master keyring off my belt and fiddled for the key to the store. I didn't know where the light switch was, and to be honest, I was way too freaked out to check behind that counter with nothing but a flashlight. I shut the door and relocked it and walked back to my post by the Christmas tree. I started chugging my coffee because I really thought I was losing it after seeing what I saw. The lights in that store all the ways down on the other side of the hall were still off, but I heard a click and then a bang echoed down in my direction, followed by someone running across one side of the hall to the other, before disappearing in an intersecting exit hallway. I sprang up and almost spit out the remainder of my coffee. I ran down the hall till I came to the intersecting smaller hallway. This hallway, which led to one of the exits, had a bunch of massage chairs, coin-operated kiddie rides, and the public restrooms. I didn't see anywhere else that person could have gone besides the restroom, as the exit doors were all locked from both sides. I got to the door of the men's bathroom and stopped, once again faced with the fear of confronting whoever was in that mall with me. I cracked the door open just slightly, enough for me to start speaking into the bathroom, saying whoever's in here needs to get out before I call the cops. There was a crying and moaning type noise coming from inside the restroom. I opened the door fully and realized it was coming from one of the stalls. I repeated what I said at the door, but the crying sounds didn't stop. I knelt down in front of the stall to get a peek under, and I saw two black shoes facing the door, facing me. It seemed the person was just facing the stall door, making these crying noises. The crying stopped, and then the next thing I saw was the person on the other side of the stall quickly get on their knees and look under the door back at me. I recognized it as the same person from behind that counter in that store. I got back on my feet and left the bathroom to call the police and explain the situation. As a security guard, I never encountered anything like this overnight, and I did know how to deal with it. I definitely did not want to make it physical. A couple police officers came to the doors at the end of the hall, and I let them in. We all went to the men's bathroom again, and the stall door was still shut, and the man was still inside. For the longest time, the officers demanded he come out with his hands up. After a while of him refusing to listen, the male officer started kicking in the stall door until it broke open. The two officers apprehended the nutjob inside the stall. As they walked him out of the mall, though, the man had his head turned to look at me the entire time. I looked away. His dead eyes staring into my soul genuinely disturbed me. He looked like he wanted to kill me. Before he was put in the back of the police car, he said my name, and I immediately got the chills. The officer said they would find out who he is and everything, and they went on their way. My shift ended a few hours later, and for the remainder of my time working at that mall, I was always paranoid every time I'd turn a corner that he'd be standing there. Our parents had our youngest sibling much later than they had my brother and I. This happened last year when I was 18, my older brother was 24, and our youngest sibling Rachel was just 2. I was home from college for winter break. My older brother would be returning home from out of state in a few days, and my parents were on a couple's vacation. It was about a week before Christmas, and I was tasked with taking care of Rachel until my parents got back. My time watching Rachel consisted of a lot of sitting around the house, having friends over, and just watching TV and movies. I would let Rachel play in the living room with her toys as I'd watch TV with no lights on but the Christmas tree, which I always find to make watching TV a lot more relaxing. When Rachel started to get tired, I brought her up to her room, changed her, and put her in the crib upstairs. I made sure to turn on the baby monitor as my parents did every night just to make sure I could hear her if she got restless. Something to note, Rachel's room shares a bathroom with my mom and dad's room. So basically, both my parents' and Rachel's rooms are connected to a bathroom, which thus connects the 2 bedrooms in a sense. I went back downstairs to watch TV. I think I was watching The Grinch when sounds started coming from the baby monitor. Distorted, human-like noises. didn't sound like Rachel, so I hurried back upstairs to Rachel's room. I burst in so quickly and aggressively that she immediately awoke and started crying. I looked around the room naturally. Then I picked Rachel up and started gently rocking her. But I realized this didn't help. She was probably too big for it. So I put her back down in the crib and started tickling her, then gently whispering her back to sleep. When she had her eyes closed again, I left the room. A few minutes later, I heard Rachel crying again through the baby monitor. I ran up to see what's wrong, and she was standing in her crib, pointing at the bathroom door, which was cracked open. I honestly didn't remember if it had been cracked open like that earlier or not. I went to check the bathroom, and it was clear. I told her calmly she's imagining things. I wasn't sure how much she understood of what I was saying, but after a few minutes in there with her, I got her to settle back down. Once again, I went down to the living room to continue watching TV. The orange light on the baby monitor once again started going off. I felt like I was in a horror movie scenario. I could distinctly hear a man's whispering coming from the baby monitor. I ran back up to that room faster than ever, burst through the door to Rachel's crying again. I went to pick her up to get her out of there. And when I turned for the door, I looked into the dark bathroom, which now had the door wide open. There was a man in my parents' room, and he started walking through the bathroom towards me and Rachel. I ran out of the house to the neighbor's house while holding Rachel. Our neighbor Judy let us in and let me use her phone to call the cops. They didn't find anyone, but Judy let us stay the night at her place regardless. The next morning, Judy went back to my house with me to look around as support. The house seemed clear. However, I couldn't help but look around the house to try and find out how he got in, but I just couldn't, and it made no sense. A couple weeks later, my mom sent me to the attic to put some of the Christmas decorations away, and you wouldn't believe what I found up there. In the corner of the attic was a bed of blankets and a pillow, hidden behind a bunch of ripped up boxes stacked up as a wall. I immediately associated it to that man in our house. We have no idea how long that man was actually in our house for.